masks on them, shields in place. They are about to go this way down Fairmont over towards Beatties, trying to push protesters back. Now, this turned violent just about a half hour ago. We saw some of these demonstrators slashing the tires of some of the CMPD vehicles. We also saw some CMPD squad cars actually physically pushing protesters back with their cars. So there has been several different points of confrontation here. We have not heard of any injuries out here. And just minutes ago, the mayor actually went to Twitter. I had asked for the mayor for a comment on what we have been seeing out here. And let me just pull this up really quick. She actually tweeted out saying, urging those in our community who are protesting tonight to refrain from violence. We can have activism and protest without violence. Of course, the main message here is this is all after those riots that we saw outside of just South Minneapolis earlier last night. And for the past several nights, of course, I'm sorry these people are getting different orders, a bit jarring out here still. But this is all after the death of Mr. Floyd up in Minnesota. There is deep pain still here in the Charlotte area. We have had numerous incidents where where people have died from CMPD officers. And you can see these people are moving in. These officers are now moving in. We are going to walk with them. We have tried to keep our distance as things did start to turn violent. We saw different clashes along Beatties Ford Road. To give you some perspective, we are at the Metro Division, just outside of the police station. But the CMPD officers in their full riot gear are now making their way up this road, this part of Renner, rather, off of Fairmont and Beatties Ford Road. They have blockaded this street, and they're moving back in to be back up to the frontline officers who have been on those front lines with protesters for, I would say, at least the past half hour to hour here off of Beatties Ford Road. Again, there is a lot of pain felt. We saw about 300 demonstrators out here throughout the evening. Starting at 6:30, it started peaceful, and then there was back and forth with police officers being surrounded with their squad cars, then them forcing their way out in some instances that we saw, and then people jumping on those squad cars, slashing tires, and then that's when it really started to escalate. We saw people jumping on the squad cars, hitting the squad cars, throwing water bottles and everything and rocks at the squad cars, and then we actually retreated for some time and came back to this scene. We came back to this scene where we saw all of these officers in their tactical gear coming outside of this Metro Division station, and then we heard flashbangs, a few of them. We saw them light up the air, and then we heard them, of course, and then we, of course, saw the smoke thereafter. And another one has just been thrown, actually. I'm not sure. That looked like it came from the protesters over towards behind the officers who were lined up here along Beatties Ford Road in their riot gear. This has definitely taken a turn. I remember speaking with some of the protesters here, and they urged to not be violent. Many of the people who I spoke to, they wanted a peaceful protest. And now I just heard some glass shattering, so people are still throwing things out here. This only feels like it is escalating out here after so much pain coming from Minnesota and various other incidents with African-American men and women and police in our nation. Fred, for right now, I'm going to send it back to you. If you have any questions, of course, that I can answer out here, feel free. But that is the latest here off of Beatties Ford Road outside of the Metro Division.
Absolutely, Hunter. A lot of good information there. I'm wondering, you've been there for quite some time, and I know that this has escalated over the duration, things starting out calm, and now they have escalated. I'm wondering if you have a sense of where these protesters are coming from. Do they live there in that neighborhood? Are they a part of that community, or did they come from other places? Do you have any way of knowing that?
That's a very good point. We had a couple of our council members out here, including Malcolm Graham, who actually told my photog Pierre Simmons and I that he expects a lot of these people. He has heard that a lot of these protesters have come from out of town. They are not from this community. That is per Councilmember Graham. We also saw former Mayor Jennifer Roberts out here. She got emotional with me earlier, saying how she doesn't know and will never know what it is like to be an African-American woman living in this country, but she feels the pain as a mother for this community sending their kids out without the promise of a safe return. But as you can see, this is still very tense moment out here, and I actually see more officers in riot gear moving forward down Beatties Ford Road as this back and forth continues. Fred? Yeah,
I asked that question of you, Hunter, because, you know, in previous protests, especially the one noted in September of 2016 after Keith Scott was killed by police, we knew that there were people who were agitating, people who had come into town who were agitating and causing trouble. Not truly a reflection of people protesting even in the Charlotte community. So a very important point there to make. Also, the former mayor, Jennifer Roberts, was instrumental in making decisions and bringing in the National Guard and having those conversations with the governor at the time. What the response was going to look like. It's certainly not the best optics for police when you see law enforcement in that riot gear. I know there are officers on bicycles as well. Talk to me about the confrontation specifically that you've seen between those protesters and the police officers. Are they simply confronting police officers who are on the bikes, or are you seeing confrontation also with those police officers who are in riot gear?
Actually, I want to take you, hold on really quick, Fred. I hear your question, but this is intensifying again behind me. We see a lot of smoke and officers actually moving these protesters back towards along Beatties Ford Road, away from the Metro Division Police Station. So they have just gone out of sight here. But to get to your question, I'm going to walk and talk with you over here so we can get a closer vantage point from a safe distance still. No, sure. But yes, there have been confrontation. At one point, there was actually an officer directing traffic, and she was outside her vehicle. At some time, she was laughing and smiling with some of these protesters, talking to them. And all of a sudden, the whole group of protesters came and surrounded her patrol car. She stood her ground. She didn't engage. She waited for backup to come. And when it did, they actually escorted her away from this scene down the street, and now they are moving us back. So we are going to, of course, respect that and get off of CMPD property and stay on this sidewalk here, staying safe. But in another incident, they did have some of those officers on bikes escorting these squad cars out of the protest along Beatties Ford Road. And in one point, we did hear a lot of the demonstrators actually told me that down the road, now I was not there to witness this, I was keeping a safe distance as well, but they were actually fighting a CMPD officer for his bike and then ended up throwing it, and that CMPD officer ran away with another police officer. Now, of course, this is what a lot of demonstrators have told me. I have spoken with other media outlets who were there who did say that happened. But again, I did not see that. That is just what people out here have reported to me. But you can see they are trying to disperse this crowd. We've heard them time and time again asking the crowd to disperse, and of course reinforced on Twitter by Mayor Vi Lyles. Fred?
I know also it's not a coincidence that location, Hunter, is one where the protesters are focusing on. Not a coincidence because up the road there we had another man, Dan Queers Franklin, who was shot and killed last year by police. And I know there are probably still some feelings about that because of the way that happened. Do you hear anything about that conversation among these protesters?
Yes, a couple of the demonstrators at the beginning, when this was peaceful, I pulled some of them aside and I said, you know, is this deeper than just what has happened up in Minnesota? And they said, yes, we've had incidents here. We had that incident that you talked about with Mr. Franklin down at the Burger King. We actually passed it just a few moments ago trying to get a different vantage point. And these protesters at the beginning, they walked from the Metro Division down Beatties Ford Road, and I walked with them quite a bit of the way, and they ended up around the Burger Burger King there. You have to believe that that was some sort of underlying message, but that shooting has come up to me in conversation. There is a lot of pain here in this community. I'm feeling it out here, Fred. These people want their voices heard, and they want action.
Yeah, specifically with that shooting, the review board made up of community members disagreed with the findings of CMPD when it came to Officer Wendy Curl, who fired that fatal shot, killing Dan Queers Franklin. So I know that's a very sensitive topic for them in that community. I know some of the work that we've done here with our station, in particular, Hunter, you know, we've worked a lot with the engagement that takes place between barbershops and police officers and the community, the liaison relationship that exists. Are you seeing those types of folks as well? I know you said you saw former Mayor Jennifer Roberts and you saw some city council members, but are you seeing other business leaders who are trying to calm people down in the midst of these emotions?
Yeah, I don't know if you would call him a leader, but I did see somebody who I recognized here. When I told you about that officer's squad car being surrounded by protesters, there was actually, I know him by Sam, but he's the one that is always yelling "Jesus saves" down in Uptown and the surrounding areas. He actually came in between protesters and that officer and yelling, of course, his chant of "Jesus saves," trying to just to lower some pressure out here, to diffuse the situation until her backup came to try to get her some help. But we also saw at the forefront of this, when this was a peaceful protest, we saw some of the CMPD officers out here actually talking to the demonstrators, asking them what questions they had, letting them know that we hear you. And I thought that was very powerful, because that's not something that I have seen in the past couple of days in other cities around the country that have had protests like this.
Yes, Sam Bethea, a beloved figure here in Charlotte. Always praying for people in the community. We see him at Romeo Bearden Park all the time. I know you know who he is as well. So where are they now? I see that things are moving along in this protest. From your vantage point, what can you see?
Yeah, from my vantage point, some of these officers are coming, of course, coughing. I take it that there have been those flashbangs that is probably triggering that response of them coming up here on their bikes. They do not have gas masks, but the protesters have started to be pushed down Beatties Ford Road towards that Burger King where Franklin was killed. They continue to move them away from this Metro division, but they still have it guarded, of course, with police officers in riot gear. I can't quite see the front line. It is starting to go out of my viewpoint, and we have been told to stay on this side of this barricade to keep our distance, so we're doing so. But it does seem that police are getting some sort of handle on this, although I still hear and see things being thrown, but they are pushing this away from the Metro division, Fred.
Yeah, and I have to imagine, too, as we see this unfold behind you, I'm seeing some of the images, too. It looks like officers are moving farther into wherever they're going. I have to imagine that as we have other protests planned for this weekend, that's been a part of the conversation perhaps people are having. I'm wondering if you've overheard anything about that, even among people who plan to demonstrate even.
Yeah, actually, when we came out here, it kind of caught some of these protesters, at least the organizer, as a bit of a shock. She didn't know that these barricades were already set up, and police were ready long before. We were out here around 5 o'clock, well before any protesters arrived, and they already had these vehicle barricades set up with the cones on each side of the Metro division. But this has to be a conversation. Police knew about this one. It seemed like, of course, the others over this weekend have been very well publicized on social media, so you know there are conversations within the department on how to prepare for this. I, quite frankly, don't know what the motive is to push them, if it's to disperse them back to their homes or their cars, but a lot of them we saw parked right here behind us, so you would have to think that they're going to want to come back at some point, Fred. Yeah.
Stick with me here, Hunter. I know that there's more developing here, but I just want to remind our viewers, if you are just now joining us, we're following a protest at the Metro division of CMPD just west of Uptown, not too far from the Northwest School of the Arts, where things started out peacefully around 6 o'clock this evening and have escalated within the past hour or so. Our Hunter signs on the scene describing scenes of protesters slashing tires of cruisers. We've also seen reports from CMPD's Twitter account where they have suffered damage to the windows of the Metro Division building as well, and we've seen what appears to be tear gas dispersed into the crowds. I want to bring our Hunter Sines back into the conversation now, who has been following this on the ground for us. Hunter, you're doing a great job of painting the picture and also keeping a safe distance, keeping you and your crew safe. What are you seeing at this point happening?
Yeah, at this point, we see a lot of debris on the ground here along Beatties Ford Road. We still see these officers barricading outside of the Metro Division here in their riot gear, but the protesters have been moved well down Beatties Ford Road. This was the epicenter of this whole thing, where it started, where we first saw those flashbangs being thrown. We actually just saw, as you were recapping there, Fred, we saw one of the police officers, kind of like a golf cart almost, coming through here with somebody detained. I don't know if it's somebody notable. We have seen a lot of council members out here, the former mayor and community leaders, but I could not see who exactly it was. They did face towards us, but I couldn't get a picture with the gas mask. So clearly they are continuing to push these demonstrators back. This started peacefully, Fred, and there was a lot of pain here that was vocally expressed towards CMPD, and then things turned violent. Like you said, we saw several people throwing rocks, slashing CMPD squad cars, but I do want to of course, be fair here. We did see at some point some of these officers trying to help their officers who were surrounded in the protest, but in doing that, they were physically pushing and running over some of those protesters who were putting their hands up in front of their squad cars, and that is what started this uptick in violence per se, Fred.
Are they containing them to the street and keeping them off of the sidewalk? What is the barrier? What is the limitation on where they can go, on where they were marching?
Yeah, Fred, they at first were trying to contain them within this street right here that was blocked off, but those protesters said they don't have to follow the rules of police officers, so they have contained them to Beatties Ford Road. Beatties Ford Road is shut down about, I'd say, 5 blocks in each direction. We're going to move up here now that these officers with riot gear, rather, have pushed them back, just to try to see what we can see out here. And you can see, actually, right over here, on Oaklawn, the intersection of Oaklawn and Beatties Ford, you see protesters at a line with CMPD officers, and we are seeing, of course, the debris here along outside of the police station. You can see that there is a broken light here, as CMPD has reported. But this is the scene. This is just about on the other block of CMPD's Metro Division. But you can also see these riot officers coming out here with their shields. Pierre, I believe I can safely be at this corner here. Photographer Pierre Simmons has been manning this camera all night long with me here, and you can see down Beatties Ford Road. So there is still a very active situation there. We have officers on their bikes. I have not seen many of those officers wearing masks, and now it looks like we have some non-squad cars coming down here. But sorry, I just wanted to make sure, of course, safety is of top concern out here, just trying to get a sense of what's going on. But you can see confrontation continues in both directions out here along Beatties Ford Road. I don't see things being thrown in either direction. So that is some glimmer of hope that perhaps things are starting to calm down here, Fred.
Yeah, and I know I mentioned earlier in the conversation that we were kind of getting a peek into what was going on out on the scene from the Twitter account from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. We're also hearing and reading tweets from our city officials. Mayor Vi Lyles tweeting, urging those in our community who are protesting tonight to refrain from violence. We can have activism and protest without violence. Hunter, you mentioned that earlier. Not losing sight of why this is even happening, what the motivation, at least initially, of this is that there's a man who died in Minneapolis at the hands of a former police officer now who has been charged with murder. Are people talking about that? We've heard about the confrontation between police in the past in the Queen City. Are people focused on their conversation and their thought process on why this is happening now?
Yes, this is just the latest. Of course, we had that other case in Georgia. Sorry, I am starting to see activity happening. We have some other people being detained by these police officers walking back to the division here along Beatties Ford Road, the Metro Division. There are 1, 2, 3 people being detained here from the front lines of the clash between protesters and police officers who have tried to create a line here on Beatties Ford Road, pushing them back. Remember, Malcolm Graham, council member, has told me that he believes a lot of these protesters have come from out of town, that this is not a representation of Charlotte and the Queen City. Remember, I talked to some who were from here at the beginning who wanted this to remain peaceful as they go back into the Metro Division. They're being detained by CMPD. But to get to your previous point, yes, that was spoken here. We had people chanting, "I can't breathe." The infamous words from Mr. Garner up in New York and Mr. Floyd in Minnesota. We had people saying murder is murder. I actually saw one sign saying 1 of 4 arrests is not enough. Of course, alluding to the 4 officers up in Minnesota who were seen in that dramatic video, the tragic video. So yes, that is the base of why they are out here. But there are multiple layers, and you feel that out here. I get goosebumps talking about it because I've felt the pain from these protesters at the beginning who were talking to me about why they are out here for local reasons. Every time that something like this happens, they say, they don't feel like anything changes. And so that's why they believe violence has erupted in several cities, and now violence has erupted right here in Charlotte along Beatties Ford Road, because they don't believe anything changes from their request when they have a controversial death of a black man or woman by a law enforcement officer, Fred.
Yeah, I'm always struck the juxtaposition of what we see and what we hear about happening in some of these encounters, and the violence that we hear spoken of and that upsets so many people. When you put that next to the disposition of the police officers on the scene of these very active and confrontational situations, describe to me how these officers are, the ones who are on the scene now in that riot gear. From my experience as a reporter, they start out in a pretty stoic stance. You know, and I know with CMPD, there's a lot of talk of de-escalation. What are these officers? What does their disposition look like in this situation?
Well, at the beginning, like I had mentioned earlier, they were trying to have an open ear to these protesters. I physically saw them out among the protesters asking to have conversations, tough conversations. So that outreach was here on the onset. And that was the case for a good couple of hours as they went back and forth. Police escorted them, making sure that no cars were going to be a problem for these protesters as they marched in the middle of the road. And then they even rejoined them here outside the West Division and were trying to have those conversations. I went and asked one of the CMPD officers, I said, what was all of that about necessarily? And he said, listen, these protesters want to be heard. And us being locked up in this building behind all of this brick and mortar, it does no good because they feel like they aren't heard. So they wanted to physically be out here and have an open ear and open dialogue with these protesters. But then, like I said, these protesters, at one point I heard one of them chant, "We don't have to listen and not be violent." And that's when we, our crew, Pierre and I, kind of took a step back because that was almost like a call for violence that we've seen around the country, including up in Minneapolis. Again, I want to paint the picture here, Fred, while I can, in case we get moved back. You can see a lot of glass shattered out here of the Metro Division. That lamp up there is shattered, of course. Things have been thrown between protesters and CMPD officers in riot gear. Pierre, I do want to turn our cameras this way if we don't mind, because you can see down this street, it looks like officers, there are still riot gear officers on the front lines, but it does seem like a squadron of officers are coming back on their bikes. Like I said, we saw those reinforcements come out, and you can believe under all that gear they need some sort of break to get back here, Fred.
Yeah, it is not a pretty sight here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I want to take you now live and show you some images that we have coming into our newsroom now. This is out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I mean, we've seen protests happening in New York. We've seen them happening in Houston. We've seen them happening in Atlanta and in other places in the country, Denver, and now we're seeing this tonight in Minneapolis, one of several days, the latest day here of protest, where you see the fire department putting out a fire. This is the scene that we're seeing painted across the country, a boiling point as people are expressing themselves, expressing their ire, their anger, and their pain over what they perceive as racism, the encounters that we hear about on a regular basis now, it seems, and the videos that we see of the proof that there is an encounter that ends in death between police and a minority person. And you can see here in Minneapolis, protest raging on, again, putting out yet another fire. We saw fires last night and the night before, looting and all kinds of violent confrontations with police. I want to take this shot that we're seeing here in Charlotte. This is, again, outside of the Metro Division that we're about to show you, where you can see folks congregating there on the corner. You see officers on bicycles holding the line, trying to contain these protesters to a certain area on Beatties Ford Road. But you heard our Hunter Signs on the scene, who's been there all evening, say that the protesters have been very vocal about not wanting to be limited in their scope of march and protest. This is more than just the protest about what happened in Minneapolis. We've had several incidents, high-profile incidents, a handful in at least the past 5 years or 6 years in Charlotte. The latest, Danquers Franklin, happening in that division just around the corner from where we can see from this camera angle. And that is what folks also are mentioning this evening. I want to bring our Hunter Signs back into the conversation because I know things still continue. I can hear and I can see that police are still holding the line. What I don't see, Hunter, it's hard for me to tell if you can see protesters from where you're standing. Are they still there?
Yes, I can. Let's swing over here. You can see protesters on each side of the barrier between CMPD on Beatties Ford Road, and I can see it from here. I'm not sure if we can zoom in and get a shot of the front line that away. Pierre, watch your back here. We have some CMPD officers going back out. Of course, you can see they're going out. Now we have fireworks, it seems, going off here. We saw that last night. I saw that well into the night, around 2 a.m. In Minneapolis. Fireworks going out. And, you know, it really does put some sort of light on what is going on down there. You can still see protesters wanting their voices heard. But again, they have turned violent and they have confronted police physically. In many instances, you can see some of the debris here that has been thrown here along Beatties Ford Road. But there is an underlying pain. Like you said, Fred, it's not just what is transpiring up in Minnesota. It is what has happened here in our own community before.
And we talked about, just to bring it up again, this is, we're just now kicking off the weekend. And, what we will see, what we could see, what I'm sure police hope we won't see, a protest. Kind of talk to us about what we're expecting to see this weekend in terms of protests that you've heard from people there on the ground.
Yeah, well, tomorrow we have the one in Marshall Park in Uptown. We don't know exactly the logistics, if it's going to be a march. We don't know if there has been a call from protesters like there was here to turn violent and to escalate the situation. But there is also a protest that is scheduled, I forget the timing, but down in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I've heard from some of my colleagues back at the station there. So there are a number of local events that are being held, and I just heard another bang, but I did not see any flash or anything, so I'm not sure what that is from. But this is the scene out here in Charlotte today. This weekend, will probably be another story, of course, on just how bad it will get, or if people will turn more peaceful into the weekend. But for now, this is what's transpiring here in the Queen City as confrontation has erupted here outside of the Metro Division along Beatties Ford Road. Protesters on each side confronting police in riot gear that were called in to help and to try to diffuse the situation. I still hear people yelling here, Fred, that Black Lives Matter, and making these chants, Fred. So it's still happening out here.
Yeah, the worst case scenario that we've seen in Minneapolis is the National Guard being called in to assist, to bring in the assist, or in many cases take over the response for what happens with protesters and law enforcement. And with several protests going on into the weekend, I know that it is a concern for police to continue to have this under control as long as it's contained. One of the situations that we ran into during the Keith Scott protest back in September of 2016, it got out of hand. It went into the interstate. It hit 277 and back up through Uptown, and then we saw violence. There was actually a man who was in that area who was shot and killed, and you know, we had all kinds of other things happen, and I know that police really, they're concerned about the safety. It's a fine line for law enforcement in terms of trying to allow people to exercise their First Amendment right, but also not be a threat or danger to others, Hunter.
Correct, Fred. And again, I can't underline this enough. And bear with us here. You are getting a ground view, but we have been out here, and Pierre, my buddy, colleague here, has had this camera, heavy camera on his shoulder. So actually, Pierre, can we turn around here? Because I just saw some flames in the middle of Beatties Ford right here. You see how quickly this is all transpiring, Fred. You turn one direction and things change dramatically, either for good or for the bad. But I did see, of course, we all saw those flames in the middle of Beatties Ford Road. We are trying to keep our distance. I know that probably our viewers are saying, hey, we want to see what's going on, but safety is important here. Hold on really quick. They're trying to...
I just heard a chant.
Oh, so we have police officers who... Yeah, no, that was a police officer yelling to the others saying, fire, fire. So that is probably to radio in or dispatch in firefighters here, of course, hopefully safely. But yes, this continues to be the scene out here. It has been violent for the past hour and a half as police officers were called in. They tried their hardest to engage with the community and have that outreach, to have that dialogue. We saw about a half dozen to a dozen at the beginning trying to do that. Some of the protesters wanted none of it. Others asked questions and welcomed that type of action from CMPD. So officers tried from the onset to get out here in front of it, to show their face, to open their ears to this community. But again, that turned as a majority of protesters started surrounding some of the officers, pushing them back into the Metro Division, rather, and then they started circling some of the traffic patrols who were out here, who then had to bring backup and reinforcement. And then, like I said, for those joining us, this really turned violent when some of those CMPD officers were trying their best to get out, but then when reinforcement was brought in, when backup was brought in to help their colleagues who were surrounded in their patrol cars, some of those patrol cars were physically pushing and running over some of the protesters who were standing in front trying to circle the other squad car. And that's when we started seeing protesters wanting none of that. And they started jumping on the patrol cars, throwing water bottles and rocks at the patrol cars. And then we started hearing the slashing of tires. And I got some of that on cell phone video that we have back at the station. But you could see some of the flat tires on these squad cars that, of course, that only worsens their chance at trying to get out safely. But that's really what fueled the violence out here and called in these officers in their riot gear and backup to come and totally diffuse the situation on both ends, Fred.
All right, Hunter, I'm about to ask you a question that I'm not sure you'll know the answer to, because I know you've been standing here giving reports, talking to me in real time, so it'll be difficult for you to know this. But I'm wondering, have you heard anything about Braxton Winston at this point? There are reports that he has been arrested. Do you know anything about that? Have you heard any rumblings about that since you've been standing there?
You know, Fred, I cannot confirm this because I am not comfortable in what I saw, but my photographer said that person who we first saw being escorted out in the gas mask, he said that was Braxton Winston. I said, how 100% are you? It looked like him. Of course, I do not have that confirmed from any city officials. I can, of course, reach out immediately after this here, but we both thought it was him.
Yeah.
But if you were hearing those several reports, it could very well be. I just, of course, want to gain confirmation that what we saw was actually him.
Yeah, if that were the case, which we have not confirmed yet, and we don't know, but if it were the case, that would be significant given Braxton Winston's rise to being an elected official. He was elected back in 2017 following the Keith Scott protest. He was an instrumental voice during that protest, and you know, there's an iconic picture of him standing in front of the police line in Uptown in the midst of all of this chaos, and he rose to the occasion as a leader, and people in Charlotte have elected him as an at-large member of the city council. So that would be substantial if that were the case. I know that there had been other people that you talked to who are city leaders. Talk to us once again for people who are just now joining us. These were not just protesters, but people in our community, leaders trying to engage some of these protesters who are out there on the scene as well, Hunter.
Yeah, they were. We actually spoke with Braxton Winston before all of this really got violent. He was out here with his kids, actually. And, you know, it was just frank conversation of what was happening out here and the need for this to happen. You can see 2 more people being detained here by CMPD from the front lines. And it actually looks like the front lines in that direction has dispersed. But back to your question, Malcolm Graham, and I'm sorry, we are both starting to cough here.
Please be careful out there.
I apologize, Fred.
You're on the front lines.
Yep.
Man.
Yeah.
Please be safe.
I think yep. Hold on, really quick, Fred. I'm gonna try to talk to you still here. Are you good, Pierre? I apologize for our coughing. We are gonna try to stay here as long as we can. But if you can still hear me, Malcolm Graham did talk about how a lot of these people were from out of town, and that was a concern of his because. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Hunter.
Because
listen, Hunter, we're going to let you catch your breath.
It's not.
We're going to let you catch your breath. Catch your breath.
Okay,
get in a safe
Fred.
position. We want you to be safe. Yeah. Well, let's go to our reporter. We have Brianna Harper, who is also on the scene. Brianna, I take it you're at a safe distance. Where are you, and what are you seeing where you are? Do we have Brianna?
I'm good, guys. I'm good to still talk to you.
Okay, well, we just saw a flashbang come out, and we see a vehicle there. Hunter, can you tell us what's going on? I don't know if you can see the same picture I can see.
Actually, I apologize. I thought that they had diffused it in one situation, but when I came to get another vantage down one way, there are still protesters in a front line in both directions. I apologize. And it looks like this one over here that we are showing you is getting a bit more violent. We have started to see things being thrown. We have the loudspeaker. You can see things being thrown right now. We can hear the loudspeaker police asking people to leave the area, trying to disperse them. But I'm also trying to let me know when we have Brianna up, because it'll give me a chance to call some of our sources to confirm that Braxton Winston.
On the scene as well. You catch your breath there, Hunter. Brianna, tell me where you are and what you're seeing.
Well, Fred, we just got here a couple minutes ago, but right now we are at the intersection of the Beatties Ford Road and LaSalle Street. This is kind of where police are planning to block off people from entering this section of Beatties Ford Road to try to keep this protest as contained as possible. So any cars trying to come this way down Beatties Ford possibly being rerouted. There are some folks coming up leaving the Beatties Ford area, but they also had their helicopter up in the air as well, kind of circulating, but they're trying to make sure that no one goes into where Hunter is, where the meat of all this is happening, closer to where that Metro Division is, where this protest first began peacefully earlier this evening. And of course, as you guys have seen throughout the evening, that has definitely escalated. But at this area here, thankfully, nothing of monumental incidents have happened just yet. And we're going to stay out here to make sure that that's the case. Again, police do have this area blocked off. Some people driving by are kind of yelling and shouting, but no one at this point is getting violent as what we've seen here before. So we'll try to keep you guys updated on anything else that we're seeing. And we also plan to speak to some activists later this evening to kind of get their perspective on everything that's happening and how they kind of plan to rally with both police and protesters to come to an understanding at this point, which is, I believe, what we all want to see at the end of the night. Fred.
Okay, stick with me for a second here, Brianna, because I know you just got there, and there's not a ton that you can tell us about the situation where Hunter is. But where you are you seeing? Was it difficult for you to get to your location on the perimeter there?
Well, so the biggest thing, we were trying to meet up with our other crew, Hunter and Pierre, closer to the Metro Division, but of course Beatties Ford Road was blocked off. So that was the busiest and most difficult part of that, is trying to get down Beatties Ford Road is nearly impossible, especially since they have so many blockades and, different routes that they want people to avoid if possible. So really that was the biggest issue we had. Once we got down this part of Beatties Ford Road, it kind of came at a stop here at LaSalle Street, and that's where they're trying to keep people from going any further at that point. So if you are out tonight, I mean, it's best just to stay inside. There's a lot happening. They want to make sure people are safe, and the best place you can be at this point is probably at home.
Okay, Bree, we'll check in with you in a bit. Stay where you are. I want to go back out to our Hunter Signs, who, Hunter, I'm hearing that you've confirmed a detail that we were asking you about earlier.
Yeah, my photog pointed it out that he believed it was Braxton Winston being escorted off in one of those police vehicles, detained. I can confirm a source has told me that Braxton Winston, council member here in the city of Charlotte, has been arrested out here in the protest. Like I mentioned, I talked to him beforehand, and he was out here with his kiddos, all of them masked up when people were close together. But I can confirm council member Braxton Winston has been arrested by CMPD here tonight.
Okay, and it would not be the first time he was arrested at a protest with the police as the subject. Hunter, thank you. I want to check in now with our Vanessa Rufus, who's been monitoring social media for us. Vanessa, we saw a tweet from the mayor earlier. I know
Are we clear for a minute?
Social media has been very active. What can you tell us about what you're seeing on social media at this point, Vanessa?
Everybody's going through the same thing, and
they have tweets right now about these protests. We've been pulling some here to showcase. Some of them you can see with crowds that are gathering in the street, people gathering around these police cars. We are seeing here, I don't know if this is the one that's up right now from Progreso Hispano News, but it talks about moments of tension that started this afternoon. Basically, the protests that escalated into violence. That's what we're seeing here. Moving on to our next slide, we're seeing Autumn Nelston tweeting about justice for George Floyd in Charlotte, NC. Hashtag no justice, no peace, Black Lives Matter. And there we see vehicle driving by there with all of those protesters gathered in the streets. You could see just dozens and dozens and dozens holding signs and marching there in the roadway. Moving on, let's see if we can pull up another one for you. Here we go. Boots Durango tweeting, quote, "You are beautiful, you are powerful, you are worth human life. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Charlotte NC." So you can see there a gathering that took place with folks there holding up signs that say their names, and there you can see everyone gathering and listening. Moving on to this tweet, actually coming to us from the Queen City Nerve, a group of about 20 protesters. They write, just crossing Beatties Ford Road to gather in front of CMPD's Metro Division, and I believe that's where Hunter has been giving us those updates. So this was before the protest began, but it said there in this quote, you can see, "We are not going to protest the way that police want us to." So we're going to continue to comb here through social media and see what else we can find. Fred, I'll send it back to you in the meantime.
Okay, thank you so much. If you were just now joining us, we've been following some developments outside of the Metro Division, just west of Uptown in Charlotte. A protest that started out pretty calm turning very raucous and confrontational between police and the protesters there. We know that police have taken several people, according to their Twitter account. It says they have made several arrests for damaging property. We know from reports from our reporters on the ground, as well as the Twitter account from CMPD News, that there were slashing of tires, there were rocks thrown at officers, rocks thrown and busting out some windows at the Metro Division building as well. And all of this unfolding because of a reaction to what happened in Minneapolis, a former police officer who has now been charged with murder, killing George Floyd on Monday. And now across the country there have been protests going on. I want to check in now with our Brianna Harper, who is standing by outside of the perimeter on Beatties Ford Road. Brianna, I know it's difficult, nearly impossible to get to the nerve center of where all of the action is near the police station, but you said you've seen people driving by and saying things that would indicate they too are emotional and have strong feelings about everything that's happening right now.
Absolutely, Fred. We actually just had a gentleman come and tell us, he said, you know, where's the protest happening? He was actively trying to find it as the road is blocked off. So he was just going to walk down there. And before he went on his way, I asked him, I said, what made you want to come out tonight? What made you want to make sure that your voice was heard in this protest? And he said, because I feel like it matters. He explained to me that he has grandchildren who are asking him why this is happening. They're trying to make sense of it all. And he said, honestly, he didn't have the answers. And that's probably the most frustrating part. And as this continues to happen more and more, he thought him coming out to this protest, him kind of joining forces with folks was the best thing to do. And I asked him this idea of how things escalated from the peaceful protest that we saw earlier in the afternoon. And of course, as the nighttime came, things became more and more violent. He said he really didn't have an answer for that. He feels like it all just boils down to frustration, and people, of course, acting on that frustration and anger and in violence. And of course, that is the outcome that no one wants. But I recommended for him to stay safe. And he said at the end of the day, that's the goal for him. And I'm hoping that that's the goal for a lot of other protesters as well. But a lot of folks who are just walking around Beatties Ford, they are keeping in mind with their mask as well, but they still want to get involved any way that they can. Yeah, we heard Hunter talking. Brianna, we heard Hunter talking about the fact that there were some people who were mentioning Danquist Franklin. That is in the area of where that shooting happened outside of that Burger King last year. I know that that's one of the handful of police-involved shootings that have been a flashpoint here in Charlotte. Have you heard people talk about other incidents besides what has happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis? Well, one thing that gentleman mentioned is just the countless hashtags, the names that we've seen. You know, there's just so many to name. He said that that is really the main point of this. And you mentioned that Burger King as we were driving down here. That was one of the first things I thought here right at the intersection of Beatties Ford. When that happened, that incident, of course, exploded the city of Charlotte. And that was just one kind of piece of this bigger picture of folks who are trying to speak out for those people who are basically, their names have become hashtags and their names start to speak volumes for those folks who kind of want to be a voice for them. So I feel like that is at the root of this conversation tonight, making sure those people are speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. Yeah, I know that's the point. It's been said that protests and riots are the language that people speak when they feel they haven't been heard, and that's what we're seeing across the country. I'm seeing some images that are into our newsroom. I don't know if these are live images or if this is video I'm seeing of fire. Can someone tell me what this is that we're seeing and where this is? Okay, this is Atlanta. So Atlanta right now looks to be on fire. We're showing chopper video of a protest going on in Atlanta around the 5 or 6 o'clock hour in our earlier newscast, and it looked nothing like this. So things have escalated there as well. You see people standing by. It's very hard to tell what the police presence is at this point, or what even the firefighter presence is at this point. We don't have control of this shot. This is a feed coming in from our sister station out of Atlanta. But again, protest going on across the country. This has been the message that protesters want to put across, that they are tired, really. We've seen the hashtag, I'm tired, I'm black, Black Lives Matter, and of course, a number of names of people who have been involved with a fatal outcome in an encounter with police, and that has been the touching point here across the country. Again, this is a live picture from Atlanta. Looks like a building is on fire. Don't know if those are protesters or if that's a gathering of people maybe who live in a residential area that might be on fire.
but we presume that it is related to the protests going on in Atlanta. I want to bring back in our Hunter Sines, who is live on the scene. He is in a close proximity to the Metro Division, and it looks like he has Malcolm Graham standing by. Hunter, is that you? What do you have for us?
No, I am not with Malcolm Graham. Brianna Harper, my colleague, is down the street, and I'm told she will be talking with Malcolm. Malcolm went home and it is going to be coming back and joining her. I'm not sure when. We do have, I want to show you, we do have some other officers in their riot gear coming back in here to Beatties Ford Road. Another round of reinforcement, and you can see those plastic bands on their legs there. That is what they are detaining and arresting these protesters with. Of course, we have confirmed that Councilmember Braxton Winston is among those who have been arrested out here. I am not sure which force going to. Are some protesters who are yelling in the middle of by this corner store, but it looks they are about go over towards my left here. We did see some people throwing things over towards the police officers here off of Oak Lawn and Beatties Ford Road. I'm sorry. We also have, of course, people right here yelling. But she, of course, is trying to warn people, saying, quote, "They're about to lock you up. Watch your backs." And that is what, from the beginning, that is the type of things that we've heard here, is the distrust. See, they are now, this is what happened beforehand, Fred. They are masking up. They kneeled down for this after given the order to do so, and they put those gas masks on, followed by the helmet with the shield, because of what has been thrown at them out here, including those flashbangs, which we ourselves have even started coughing because of that it is already in the air. But there's a lot of pain out here, Fred, and protesters. It has thinned off from what I can tell in my viewpoint. At one point, there was an estimated, unofficial of course, but police estimated around 300 people were out here at the beginning. But police have started to get a better hand on this scene out here. In both directions, though, there are still lines of officers in riot gear and reinforcements here moving in to these protests in Charlotte, once again, that have turned violent. Fred.
All right, please keep a safe distance. Be safe out there. Stick where you are. We're going to come back to you and gather more information. Right now, I want to go over to our Brianna Harper, who is standing by, and you have Malcolm Graham standing by you. Brianna, is that correct?
Yes, he just joined us here. He said he's been
things
out
have
here
turned
pretty much
violent
all
out
night
here,
covering these protests. So we wanted to get a chance to speak to him and kind of get his perspective on what he was seeing here earlier. Mr. Graham, kind of what can you tell us about just kind of the atmosphere that you've witnessed here personally tonight?
Well, certainly this is a nationwide event that's happening tonight all over the country. People are protesting. It's not peaceful protesting. It's more of destroying public property, destruction. Everyone has a right and opportunity to peacefully protest. What happened this week in our country is without precedent in terms of the killing of African-American men. We saw it with our own eyes. But we have to know how to protest, to do it peacefully, to protest with our brains and our will and our might, and not by throwing rocks, destroying public property. Beatties Ford Road is the heart of the African-American community in Charlotte. I represent the district. I'm concerned about my neighbors and my friends over here. The police department are doing a great job practicing restraint. I've been here for about 3 hours. And again, if those, many of the individuals are not from Charlotte, they're from out of town. They're agitating and instigating public violence. And that's not the way to solve our problems, certainly not here in Charlotte. And so I'm here, again, just making sure that my neighbors and my friends along the corridor are okay, and that we provide the type of support that both our community needs right now, but also our police officers as well.
And also what's unfortunate is that this isn't anything new specifically for Charlotte. It's kind of the eerie deja vu of what we've seen in years past of protests kind of becoming an escalated episode of violence. You know, how do you even compare this to what we've seen before?
Charlotte is now the 15th largest city in the country. These are large city problems. Again, many of the protesters aren't from Charlotte. They have been imported to do this type of community unrest. It is unfortunate. The issues of racism and discrimination is real. They need to be attacked using our brains and our will and our might, calling out it and bringing attention to it. This is not a way to bring attention to it. And so, again, we have to learn from our mistakes. We have to address Americans' Achilles heel, which is racism, and certainly that doesn't escape Charlotte as well.
And then tonight, the burden, unfortunately, kind of lands on CMPD. They're trying their best to kind of keep things contained and keep things from getting out of hand with them blocking off Beatties Ford Road here. What other tactics have you noticed from them just to kind of make sure that this is a controlled environment?
Well, the first, that they practice a lot of restraint in terms of giving the protesters the opportunity and the space to do just that, to do it peacefully. And then it took a turn. In terms of those here protesting from out of town, beginning to do it in an uncivilized way where it brings negative attention to the issues and obviously a police reaction. And so they're doing as much as they can to make sure that the citizens along the corridor are well protected, protecting public property, and protecting those who live along the corridor. This is also a residential area as well, and so we need to make sure that our residents, our seniors in the area, know exactly what's going on and know that the CMPD are doing their jobs.
What would you say, just in your best estimate? I know a lot of people you mentioned are outsiders, or not from Charlotte, or not from the Queen City. Just your best guess, how many people are coming from outside to influence all this?
I don't know. I don't know. I know that none of the individuals who are grassroots organizers in our community were aware of the event of tonight, and certainly this is not the way they conduct themselves at all. Again, this is just a major issue that's facing all large American cities based on what's happened in the week. The president tweets doesn't make it any better when they loot, we shoot. That instigated, incites violence. And I think we all need to kind of take a couple of steps backwards, let the law enforcement nationwide do what has to be done. Again, we can't back away from what's happening across the nation and our country.
And we were mentioning before, there have arrests that have been made, and unfortunately one of those have been Councilman Braxton Winston. I mean, he's always been very outspoken. He's been a very vocal activist in our community. When you hear about his arrest, just, your thoughts.
I don't know anything about it. I heard that he got arrested. I don't know why, when, to what extent, so I can't comment on that.
Gotcha. Any word of advice? We saw some people out here actively going to the protest. Word of advice for folks who want to come out here, make their voices heard, but do so safely? I
think you stay at home tonight. Tonight is not the night to come out, because this is not an organized protest against racism or discrimination. This is just basically anarchy. Those individuals who are expressing themselves in a very negative type of way.
All right. Thank you so much for coming out here, and you stay safe, and we'll do the same.
Thank you very much.
And we'll keep you guys updated. Again, we're right here at the corner of Beatties Ford Road and LaSalle Street, where the police are trying to keep the protests blocked off from the main event that's happening closer to the Metro division off of Beatties Ford Road. We have spotted the chopper in the air that's kind of keeping an eye in the sky of all the activity that's going on, but they want to make sure that folks are not making this a worse situation than it already is. Again, we've mentioned property has been destroyed, people have been arrested. Unfortunately, this area right here is the calm spot. This is kind of the outskirts of everything that's happening. So we're kind of in the best safe spot right now. And as Malcolm mentioned, if you can stay home, that's probably the best safe bet for yourself as well. Fred?
Right, advice from Malcolm Graham, former state senator, now Charlotte City Councilor, who represents resilience for a lot of people in Charlotte because of his connection to the Charleston Nine, his sister, one of the Charleston Nine, who was killed in a church back in 2015. Just speaking to our Brianna Harper, telling her, advising anyone to stay away from that area, also lauding the restraint that he has seen from CMPD during their response. I want to check in now with our Vanessa Rufus, I think, who is standing by, who's been monitoring social media. Vanessa, what are you seeing?
Well, you'd pointed out some various hashtags that have really become a signature of these demonstrations that we've been seeing in recent days. And yes, one of them, Black Lives Matter, and another one that we're seeing a lot on Twitter is hashtag I Can't Breathe. And so I have been able to find several tweets with pictures and video of folks protesting here in the Charlotte area, linking to those tweets here with that hashtag. So one of the new ones, we're seeing some signs where we see that hashtag displayed on there, hashtag I Can't Breathe. And it looks like there are actually various names of different people written on this sign underneath that one large hashtag as people there march in the streets. We're also seeing here just outside CMPD there, that Metro Division, which we've talked about a lot this evening, hashtag George Floyd, and you can see there that I Can't Breathe sign, that person holding that up right in front of that Metro Division building. We had mentioned before, and I believe Hunter had alluded to this earlier in the evening, an incident involving an officer and a bike, and the Queen City Nerve had this video, and it shows what appears to be a confrontation, a verbal confrontation between a group of protesters and some officers here in the middle of the street. And the caption says this officer was alone near where the bike was stolen, about 50 yards from where his fellow officers have retreated to. So there you can see some officers and this gentleman having a dialogue right in the middle of the street there, and it seems to be centered around that particular issue. Protesters chasing bike police up Beatties Ford and Celia, where police have turned around and formed a barricade. And we could see all those bike police there lined up with their bicycles, and they're basically creating this human barricade there in the street. The caption goes on to say they're preparing gas canisters. So we had mentioned that, of course, this evening already. Walk through outside the Metro Division, seeing lots of people gathering out in the streets again with signs. And I believe I heard too Hunter talking about, maybe an estimate of 300 to 400 people. I mean, that's basically what I'm gathering from seeing here on social media, different depictions of the crowds that have gathered to demonstrate today, Fred. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. If you're just now joining us, we're following this breaking news unfolding outside of the Metro Division off of Beatties Ford Road. Hundreds of protesters starting out peacefully, ending in confrontation between police. That location, not coincidental. We've been mentioning a name, Danqueris Franklin, a shooting, an encounter that happened back in March of 2019 between a 27-year-old black man and officers as he made his way to a Burger King there in that neighborhood. The whole dispute between whether Officer Wendy Curl operated reasonably when she fired shots, killing him eventually. What really was controversial in that case, and what lots of people will debate even now, is the reaction of police. In the videotape, it was controversial at the time when it came out. At least 20 times the officers asked him to calm down. They thought he might be armed. The officer gave him a command to put his hands up, and when he put his hands up, the debate or contentional point here is that he did not have a weapon or wasn't pulling a weapon out, but the officer fired her shots, and later in the end the DA could not prove that the police officer Wendy Curl was unreasonable in her perceived threat to what was happening. And of course, that was a controversial incident that happened. Even playing back the tape and the audio that police later released, one could come up with the conclusion that Danqueris Franklin was saying that he was basically complying with the officer. And so people are upset over that, in addition to a handful of other shootings that have happened in our recent history. I want to bring in WCNC Charlotte's Hunter Sines, who has been on the scene all of this time, who has seen this thing pretty much from the very beginning, from calm to confrontational at this point. Hunter, what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, I'm actually going to give you a look so that I can also get over here and not have my back to it, because we have seen a lot of protesters throwing what seem to be water bottles. Whether they're filled with water or not, I'm not sure, but throwing them over on the officers. We did just see every other officer was kind of patterned with a firefighter. Also in all of this protective gear as the fire department is now moving in, and we can see some more officers coming out of the Metro Division with their tactical gear on, their riot gear. They, of course, are going in the opposite direction. Now, I want to say CMPD has managed to move this line of protesters down several blocks towards that Burger King off of Beatties Ford Road. In the other direction, over on Oaklawn, it's just on the corner of where this Metro Division is. But like I was saying, you can see some of the firefighters. They are the ones with the brown and yellow vests on, and then, of course, the CMPD officers have the dark clothes on with the batons, as you can imagine, and they are moving them in. I haven't seen any fires per se, but we do know, of course, many of these firefighters are trained as paramedics in case there are those needs out here. So they have started to safely move firefighters into this line as things continue to be thrown out here. I did get an update from CMPD. They wouldn't say a number, but they have made several arrests out here from these protests that have escalated over the past several hours. They said, though, their main priority is the safety of everyone out here. They are encouraging people to go home, to disperse, and to start. And I'm starting. You still see the helicopter out here and everything, but there are barricades, actual physical barricades, and then barriers with CMPD officers in just about every direction you can see. You see these protesters over here to your right, Pierre. This is like a little corner store here, and some of them are still yelling and protesting peacefully from what I've seen here. And you can see this band of officers facing them. So they are making sure that all of their bases are covered here in case things escalate again out here, Fred.
Yeah, it is an intimidating sight to see all of those police officers lined up like that in their gear, fully ready for confrontation. A mixed message there. They are ready for confrontation, but they are calm and hoping they can avoid it. Hunter, thank you. I want to go now to our Brianna Harper, who is standing by kind of on the perimeter of that scene. Brianna, I know that you've seen people passing by and officers have standing by to kind of control the traffic, or stop the traffic rather, in that area. What else are you seeing at this point since you've been there?
Yeah, Fred, those roadblocks here continue right along Beatties Ford Road, so people can't physically get down the street by driving. So now they're planning to walk down the street to make their way towards the Metro Division, which is probably a couple blocks down this way near Beatties Ford Road. And a lot of folks that I noticed that have walked by us, they're all on their phones. They're either on Facebook Live, they're documenting this night every minute that they can, really just to showcase what's happening for folks who may not be here in Charlotte, showing them what's happening and kind of communicating what their thoughts are, what they're feeling, how they're making sure that their voices are heard. And again, as we've mentioned so many times tonight, that is at the root of this protest tonight. You can hear this gentleman clearly saying that no justice, no peace. That has been the chants that we've heard, and I believe that is really the message that these folks want to get across as clearly as they can. And on the flip side of that, CMPD wants to make sure they're able to do that, but they want to make sure that they do that safely, Fred.
Yeah, I know you just finished talking to Malcolm Graham, and he talked a lot about the restraint. He thought it was, he was impressed with the restraint that the police officers demonstrated during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. CMPD, or at least where we stand at this point, right at the corner of Beatties Ford and LaSalle, they haven't had any confrontations with folks. Some people have gone by, honked their horns, and made shouts and different phrases, but really CMPD is just monitoring the situation. They haven't had any issues so far with any folks, and really that's the kind of the key that they want to make sure they keep things as easygoing and as non-confrontational as possible. So at this roadblock, they're standing outside of their cars. They don't have any of the riot gear or some of that protective stuff that's needed further down Beatties Ford at the key of where all this is happening tonight.
And it just popped in my brain now as I'm talking, as we're going through this conversation. So the police in that area where you are aren't really as confrontational, it appears. I mean, I can see from behind you, it looks like the cars are just there, but there are still people walking, past that line to join the protest. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they're not stopping those folks who are walking. Basically, they're stopping actual traffic on the roads. But if you're walking, they're allowing you to make your way down Beatties Ford just as easily as anything else. So that is something they're not trying to stop folks from participating, but they're trying to keep traffic from getting in the deep of all of this and causing any additional troubles that we've seen tonight.
Okay. Brianna Harper reporting live for us right now. Thank you for that. If you're just now joining us now, we have been following this for at least a good hour now. The development of this protest going on in West Charlotte, just outside of the Metro Division, where we heard reports of, or we've confirmed actually, reports of slashed tires, damage to property, the actual division building, and also confrontation that we've heard on multiple occasions with a police officer on a bicycle. Kind of what we've been seeing across the country with protests going on, even at this hour here in Charlotte, at this hour in Atlanta, and also in Minneapolis and other major metropolitan areas, people expressing their ire, their pain, and their frustration with what seems to be a national trend for decades, really, but in recent history, between minorities and their encounters with police ending in fatalities. Again, this is a protest that was scheduled to happen at the Metro Division just west of Uptown. Started out calmly with very little confrontation and escalated as the time went on. Initially, we heard from our Hunter Signs that police thought these protesters who were causing the most trouble might be agitators or people coming in from out of town. And we also confirmed that one of the folks who was taken into custody was our Councilman Braxton Winston, the at-large councilman who rose to fame really here in town after the Keith Scott protest in Uptown back in 2016. So again, about 300 or so protesters and many more coming, as we heard from our Brianna Harper reporting, that they are walking past that line as police prevent actual traffic from vehicles. They are allowing people to walk past the line, people recording everything that they're seeing for social media's sake, mirroring what we are seeing across the country with thousands of people lining up to express their ire and their anger over the situation across the United States. Do we want to go to our Hunter Signs? Who's the picture that I'm seeing up at this point? Okay, that's Hunter Signs there on the scene. I just saw a walking shot there too. Okay, Hunter, what can you tell us about what you're seeing?
Yeah, still the same out here. You can see police in their riot gear. We continue to see more and more come out of the Metro Division. And every time, I'm sorry, but every time one of them comes back, I don't know if they have some of these fumes on them, but it starts to choke us up from those flashbangs that have been thrown. I have heard the protesters back there start to rile up again and get more vocal and louder on this side near Oaklawn and Beatties Ford Road. But, you know, earlier today we did have a number of community activists and community leaders, both current and former, who attended this when it was peaceful. One of them was our former mayor, Jennifer Roberts, and she got emotional with me when I asked her what brought her out here and what does she want the community to know who aren't turning out for things like this. And here's what she had to say a little bit earlier this evening.
And, you know, this pain is real. I have talked to so many of my friends, my black and brown friends, who are tired of seeing this killing continue. And, you know, we are in a pandemic, we are in a crisis, people are hurting, they've lost loved ones, they've lost their jobs, and now we have racism rearing its ugly head once again.
You know, she said also, Fred, that people just need to understand this is real and this is happening in our country. She was very emotional with me, trying her best to hold back tears as she said that we need to come together, all races. We have to put our differences aside and come and support one another. We are one country after all. Of course, she's the former mayor. She has been an activist out here for minority issues and problems like this. But as you can see, that was when this was a peaceful protest. This has escalated throughout the night. I would say, although it does look tense with a lot of police in riot gear and protesters still out here being vocal and yelling, they are now asking, actually, over the loudspeakers again. This just ebbs and flows, Fred. At one point, you think that maybe they are starting to disperse and you don't hear much, and then it gets the volume picks back up and things start being thrown once again. There's really no telling how long they are going to be out here. We're now hearing screeching of tires, and we've heard that from time to time. But that's the latest out here outside of the Metro Division. Police have made quite a few arrests. They said, quote, several arrests. They are now asking them to disperse. Let me listen in really quick, Fred. They're actually saying it in Spanish now, to disperse. They are hoping this crowd will start to dissipate, but people are still out here with their signs, with their voices, and they are confronting at the line those police officers in riot gear, and as you can see, we see firefighters also in protective gear behind them, just in case things flare up. Again, we have already seen flames out here. We've seen those flash bangs out here. The good news, I have not heard of anybody being hurt out here. But that's the very latest, Fred.
Yeah, I know it is a changing and challenging environment that you're reporting in, and you're doing a great job, my friend. Please stay safe out there.
Yeah, thank you, Fred. I appreciate that. It's just good to, of course, keep our distance in this. We have seen things being thrown, but we, of course, just want to stay safe, as I believe overall a lot of people out here do. I thoroughly believe nobody wants to get hurt in this, but this is a very active situation still hours after it started, Fred.
Okay, Hunter Saenz reporting live in the nerve center of the action there. I want to take you now to a picture that we're seeing out of New York City. It looks like New York police officers on bicycles handling a situation there, perhaps detaining someone. Before we showed you the video here on your television screen, I could see in what we call our preview monitor, it looked like they were running, maybe pursuing someone, but they're at an intersection there somewhere in New York City. I think, is this Brooklyn? Can someone tell me where this is specifically in New York City? At any rate, they are protesting in the Big Apple as well as many other major metropolitan areas across the country. As you heard Hunter Saenz just report, a unified voice in all of these cities, all of these protests taking place because this is something, what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd, something that has happened in just about every major city in the country, a fatal encounter between at least a minority, in most cases an African-American man, and the police. And what you are seeing here is kind of the outcome of that, the outcome of the reaction, at least at this point. Protesters standing by, police mobilizing, some in bicycles, others in their riot gear. A common scene that we see during this time as they mobilize and they plot and they plan a way to contain that anger, that protest, and in many cases a constructive voice. They want to contain it so no one gets hurt. But this is New York City. It looks like it's pretty calm right now compared to what we've seen in Atlanta, what we've seen even here in Charlotte in recent pictures. I want to take you now actually to a picture in Atlanta where we are looking, I don't know, where is this? Do we know where this is? This looks like it's outside of maybe the football stadium. We don't have control of this camera, by the way, which is why it's moving like that. Our sister station in Atlanta has control of these pictures. So maybe if they pull out a little bit, you can see right there. This looks like media staging an area where there have been some damage going on from protesters. We've seen this kind of thing happen across the country. We saw it happen in Minneapolis as the protesters got angry, and as time goes on, and this is something that you hear police talk about after the fact a lot of times in hindsight when they talk about their response to these things, the longer time goes on, the more people get agitated, also more opportunity for people to come in out of town, those agitators who aren't even a part of the community. And there was talk, at least reports, that perhaps some of the folks who were taken into custody here in Charlotte were not Charlotteans. So now let's go live out to our Brianna Harper. I know we're going to go to Vanessa Rufus, who is joining us live from her home studio in Uptown, but she's been following very closely what we're seeing on social media. Vanessa?
Hi there, Fred. Yeah, we have been seeing a few more pictures and video coming in here on the social media feeds. A couple things standing out to me, actually. It's been kind of difficult, I would say, to weed through some of these just because there are some signs that I kind of have to get out of the way because they have maybe foul language or something derogatory about police. But in general, I would say that a lot of the signs here have a lot of the hashtags that we've mentioned, like hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag I Can't Breathe. I'm seeing here some of the new pictures of, it looks like actually just a crowd that's gathering, it looked like before the sun went down. But they're standing in the street, and it looks like they're raising their fists in solidarity with each other. They're posing for the camera, and the camera's panning across, and we can see everyone with their fists in the air. So just a moment of solidarity, really, we're seeing with these demonstrators in that one particular piece. We're seeing as well, we've got here actually a Spanish TV reporter tweeting actually about some rocks that were thrown. I'm actually translating from Spanish, but it looks like rocks thrown at police by protesters, and there were some arrests made on that front. And also, we're seeing actually a very poignant sign which resonates at this time because we're dealing, of course, with the coronavirus and this pandemic. A sign that actually says here, and there you can actually see there on the top right portion of your screen briefly, white supremacy is the real virus. And that's followed up there with a caption of a George Floyd protest, I can't breathe, Black Lives Matter. So we continue to go through here, this feed. I will say some of the pictures and video are starting to slow down as we go on throughout the evening, but I'll try to do my best to cull some more and see if I have anything that sticks out to me, and I'll pass it along to you guys, Fred.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. And I think these we took the pictures down. Thank you, Vanessa, for that report. I want to go now to show you some images that we have coming. What was the image I just saw here? Okay, where are we right here? What am I seeing in the preview monitor? Looks like we've, okay. It looks like Atlanta's on the left with the fire, and New York City is on the right-hand side. And you can see it looks like a car is burning in Atlanta at this point. As police try to contain that area, they're trying to keep a safe distance. One of the tricky things about policing a situation like this is kind of the same as being a reporter on the scene that you've heard our reporters talk about, specifically Hunter Sines in the last time we spoke, that this is a changing situation. You never know what's going to happen with the protest crowd. I know from covering them personally that at some point you can feel, it's like being at a sporting event in some ways where you can feel the energy move, literally. And when the energy moves, protesters move. And that is always unpredictable. It's an art when it comes to trying to safely police people and allow them to express their First Amendment rights, but also keep everyone safe. And you heard one of our city councilors, Malcolm Graham, laud the police department for the exercise and restraint that they've had at this point. We haven't necessarily seen what we've seen in Minneapolis here in Charlotte, North Carolina. But at this point, again, we've been following this now for several hours, at least the past hour or so on our air here. The Metro Division protest, the police department's Metro Division office there in West Charlotte, just west of Uptown, the focal point of a protest following what happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis. At this point, more than 300 protesters participating in that protest. Several people taken into custody. Not only for slashing tires and and doing damage to the police building, but also their encounter with police. We heard reports of a police officer on a bicycle getting into a tussle with a couple of protesters who stole his bicycle. I want to go now to our Brianna Harper, who is live on the outskirts of the protest area that police have cordoned off. They're allowing foot traffic, but they're not allowing vehicle traffic, Brianna.
Yeah, Fred, that's exactly right. So we were at the corner of Beatties Ford and LaSalle. We have actually made our way walking down Beatties Ford, and right along this corner here is where police have kind of created their line of barricade. Earlier, as we were walking up, we saw them throwing that tear gas, and people started to scatter very quickly. A lot of folks started coughing. They were trying to cover their faces, cover their eyes. You can feel it in your throat. You can feel it in your nose, kind of this atmosphere from the tear gas in the air. And so once that happened, that's when folks really started to get out of here and move as far away from the officers as they can. But they have like this solid line here right on Beatties Ford, keeping anyone from going through there. They have their shields up, they have their helmets and everything, all that protective gear that they need to make sure that this crowd stands away. And you can see some cars managed to make their way down here. They're now kind of rerouting and kind of making circles and donuts in this area. But for the most part, it's just a group of people kind of doing a standoff very far away from this police line. And Mike Hansen, our photographer here, is trying to get a little bit closer so you can see this line of defense that the CMPD officers have made kind of as a united front to protect against these protesters, that is, from moving any further down Beatties Ford Road here. So it looks like they have the situation pretty well contained. The protesters are keeping their distance, which is the best case scenario for this situation here. Fred?
Just now joining us, you were the reporter who just spoke with Malcolm Graham, our city councilor in Charlotte, who was there talking to you. Kind of recap what he told you about, his impression of this protest and what he thinks people should keep in mind.
Yeah, well, one of the main things he said is that you want to make sure your voice is heard, but you want to make sure it's heard in the most kind of proactive way. And he said that the violence is really not the answer. And for the most part, he was saying if folks wanted to come out tonight, that's probably not the best idea because things have escalated the way that you do not want to see. So he was saying if you want to protest, you want to make sure your voice is heard, make sure you do it in a way that it is actually an active and organized protest and not something that's kind of gotten out of control here like what we're seeing tonight. He also mentioned that CMPD has exercised the best restraint possible. He said they're trying to make sure that this is not something that's like a combat or confrontation between these two groups. So that is one thing that he did praise for CMPD, and he wants to remind folks that really at the end of the day, he understands their pain, he understands their frustration, but this is not what he wants to see for his city, and I understand that a lot of other people may feel the same.
Yeah, I know that it's a, we heard that we saw the tweet earlier from Vi Lyles where she basically reiterated what he said, that it's not, we don't want to see violence from people in the city. And I would actually say, based on what we've seen, obviously, there's been a number of property damage incidents that we've seen and we've heard from police, and also the encounter anecdotally that we know about between a bicycle officer and protesters. But we, in terms, if you compare it to, pictures that we've shown you even in the past 45 minutes out of Atlanta and pictures that we've seen out of Minneapolis and the kind of response that we saw out of Denver even yesterday, this protest seems to be pretty much under control. From a law enforcement perspective, I would think that that's, what the impression would be. What are you hearing from protesters who are coming by on foot, Brianna, as they're coming by and they're making their way? Are the protesters, are they from that neighborhood, the folks you're seeing, or are they from other areas of Charlotte?
Now, Fred, that is one thing I'm not sure. I know when we spoke to Malcolm Graham, he said he believes that a lot of people are outsiders. They're coming from surrounding cities. They're not from Charlotte, and they're the ones who are instigating and making this something a violent and confrontational thing that it shouldn't be. But as we were walking by, a lot of people were continuing that chant that we've heard so many times before: no justice, no peace. I heard a lot of people also shouting for George Floyd's name, of course. He was the person that's at the center of this, the Minneapolis man, that is, who was unfortunately murdered murdered, and this is how this is all kind of became about. If you take a look, Hanson, if you want to move forward, it looks like they're trying to kind of advance this crowd here, I guess, to push them back even further down Beatties Ford. You can see them kind of actively moving with their shields, with their batons, and they're starting to spray some of that tear gas in this direction as well. We're going to kind of move back with them to avoid being hit as well. And of course, in response, a lot of folks are screaming back at them as they move closer in their direction. So we're continuing to move back along with them just to kind of remain as distant as we can for our own safety as well.
Okay, I'm gonna break out of you, Brianna, and let you get in a safe position. Safety is utmost importance to us, so you get in a safe place, you and Mike Hanson. I want to check in now with our Hunter Sines now, who is on the scene. Hunter, it looks like you've put on a face mask at this point. What has changed about the conditions prompting that move from you?
Yeah, in between our shots here, we actually went to get another battery, but at that time, we had more of those flashbangs here about a block away from where I'm standing at the intersection of Oaklawn and Beatties Ford Road, just outside of the Metro Division. And a lot of that type of tear gas smoke came my way, and I got a text from a colleague, actually, hey, you have the mask out here. We are still in a pandemic, believe it or not. So I had one on me, and it at least is helping somewhat. I was getting choked up there earlier, but that's the scene out here. We have seen time and time again those flashbangs being used to try to disperse the crowd. And it has been somewhat successful. The protesters are still out here. When that happens, they back up, but then police get a little bit ahead of them, but they're still pushing forward. They're still there with their signs, yelling, throwing things at times over towards police officers. We do know that there have been several arrests. There's been damage here to the Metro Division. Started the cleanup process out here, but officers are in their riot gear, and they are just about at every section. Beatties Ford Road. You have them here facing this group of people, and then you have them on bikes at every single intersection, making sure they have their perimeter covered. So as you were alluding to, the images that we have seen, even within the past couple of 45 minutes to an hour that we've been on the air from other cities, in perspective, CMPD officials have a good hand as Chopper is circling the area. They have a good hand on this crowd out here. And they were pretty quick to act. Once things started escalating and turning for the bad, they started stepping in more and more, putting out more officers with riot gear and backing people away and kind of driving and diffusing the situation outward. So in perspective, yes, this is a lot better than what we saw earlier when those patrol cars, their tires were slashed. Some of the officers were physically pushing some of these protesters that were standing in front of their patrol cars, and we also had patrol cars surrounded. So this has been a long night. It started at 6:30 peacefully here in front of the Metro Division, and then they marched down Beatties Ford Road towards the Burger King where Mr. Franklin was killed by a CMPD officer here. That is, of course, yet another reason people are out here. It's not only about Mr. Floyd's death up in Minnesota. It's a deep-rooted pain here in the Queen City. And it's what he told me here. It's like a Band-Aid keeps getting ripped off when these sorts of shootings happen. And so you have a lot of deep-rooted pain, and people wanted to vocalize that. They wanted change out here until this started turning escalating. You can see right here, this guy's trying to walk down the sidewalk, and officers in riot gear are telling him he's not allowed. As they, of course, right on the other side, they have line of officers, and so they're making sure nobody walks up behind them, so they're asking him to leave as well. He's turning around and doing so. But that's the scene out here. The other way towards that Burger King down Beatties Ford Road, I'm just backing up so that I can get a clear. There are still a line of protesters and CMPD officers from what I can see. We, of course, are keeping an eye on this end. Brianna's keeping an eye at the location where she's at, but it's still a very active situation, and They are now chanting "No justice, no peace." That has been a rallying cry out here all evening, even when this was once more peaceful than what it was just about an hour ago. But like you alluded to, this is way more under control than it once was, Fred.
Yeah, and to underscore what you're saying about being under control, I want to show our viewers these live images that we have coming into our newsroom at this point. On the left, Atlanta. On the right, Minneapolis. I think we're just taking the Minneapolis site. Minneapolis once again on fire. One out of several nights consecutively that we've seen protests going on in Minneapolis. You see firefighters putting out a fire. This is what we've seen too. We've got a picture out of Atlanta that is not a very good picture.
You might want
to
come back to us.
But even in that okay, let's go back to Hunter Signs. We're hearing some developments going on in the scene. Hunter, what's going on?
Hey there. Yeah, they seem to try to be detaining somebody over there. We just saw somewhat of a scuffle from a distance. Photog Pierre Simmons is zooming in for you here, but you can see there's more confrontation at this line of riot officers in riot gear and protective gear, and it looks like they are trying to detain somebody, and there's just a lot of movement happening over there on the ground, it looks like, and things still continuing to be thrown at officers out there on the line with protesters, Fred. Of course, this is an evolving situation. Like I told you before, it's kind of like a roller coaster. At one point, you don't hear much, and then it all starts back up again. And I'm actually going to toss back to you because I'm starting to get this this gas back into my own system here, and I'm going to start coughing here in a minute. Get in a safe place, Hunter. Get in a safe place, bud. All right, well, if you're just now joining us, you are not looking at a picture of New York City. This is not Washington, D.C., Atlanta, or Minneapolis that we've seen on the news over the past several days because of the protests going on following the death of George Floyd. This is Charlotte, North Carolina. Protest happening right here in the Queen City. You see a line of police officers, and you also see firefighters, or those are not firefighters, I don't think, but you see police officers there on the scene. This is in the Metro Division, just outside of the Metro Division in West Charlotte, just outside of Uptown, off of Beatties Ford, not too far from the Northwest School of the Arts, where a protest started around 6:30 peacefully. Peacefully, no confrontation at all between CMPD and the protesters. And as time went on, you start to see the confrontation between those protesters and CMPD, resulting in tires being slashed, windows being broken, and even a confrontation between a police officer on a bicycle. You're seeing images now of a person being detained, one of several people who have been paraded into the Metro Division office here in West Charlotte in the past couple of hours. Another one of those people that we saw who had been arrested earlier this evening, or at least detained, was Braxton Winston, who kind of rose to leadership in the city after his involvement with the protest that took place back in 2016 following the death of Keith Lamont Scott. Another man, also a black man, killed at the hands of Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police. I want to bring in now the mayor of Charlotte, Vi Lyles, who joins us on the phone. Hi, Mayor. Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to talk to us.
Oh, it's an important time to talk to you all and to be able to reach out to the community. So thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Well, we certainly appreciate it. What do you want people in Charlotte to know about what we are seeing happening in the city? It's unnerving to a lot of people because of what we've seen happen in other cities across the country. And what do you want us to know about what's happening?
Well, first I want to say to George Floyd's family and all of us across the nation that saw this really devastating act, how painful it was to watch and how much numbness it has given us, but frustration at the same time. And what I want to say is that I understand that. You can't live in this country today and not understand every time one of those images of someone being killed by police, black men particularly. We've gone through this in our community, in our city, and we came out better for it. And so what I want our message to be is to remember that we got through this, and we got through it because we honor and respect the voices of dissent and protest, and we work with people and not just ignore it. We change. our police department has changed, de-escalation training, understanding how important it is to engage with the community. Community policing is really done in collaboration and not with just kind of like some passing of a trend or an act of kindness. We're out there in the neighborhoods, and what I want to say to Minneapolis and St. Paul is that there are models out here of ways to engage and work hard together and to do the work that makes a difference.
Madam Mayor, were you on the scene earlier? Were you anywhere near the scene?
I was not.
Okay. I'm wondering, I know that people have probably been in contact with you who have been. I'm wondering if you're hearing from them or from any other people, maybe the difference in what we saw back in 2016 in terms of the engagement between police and the community versus what we are seeing tonight.
Well, my first calls from this surprisingly came from two faith-based leaders in this community, the faith-based leaders on the west side, to call me and say, I want you to know what's happening. And that, to me, says that people in this community care deeply about these kinds of actions. And so what I have heard from many leaders across the city tonight, they've called and said, what can we do? How do we start the dialogue? How do we continue to do this work in our community? And what they have said is that they're willing to call and talk about this. And you notice that there are several people that were engaged in this protest that said, wait, let's stop, let's protest peacefully. It didn't end up being that way. But at the same time, I have to thank the CMPD for their great restraint. And they stood and they tried very hard not to create that kind of image that we would have in past years.
It's got to be on your mind that, you know, this is just the beginning of the weekend. We've got a protest in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is not Charlotte, North Carolina, but certainly in proximity enough to be of note and concern, but specifically in Marshall Park. What are your concerns or your thoughts going into the weekend with this just getting started, knowing that things can escalate?
What I think is tomorrow is a new day. We all gather together. We bring the people that we have worked with in the past, the people that we have depended to speak with us, to neighborhoods, to speak to activists, and that we really work and listen hard to what they think that we need to do to be safe and allow them to protest safely and have the places that they are, allow them to be someplace that they can actually be heard, and that we can do it in a way that we all respect each other. And that's what I think. So tomorrow we start a new day. We start out talking about how do we do that, and we engage with all of the people that want to participate.
And what do you think, and I know this is a snapshot in time and that, you know, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or even Sunday, but if things continue as they are now, the scenarios that we see protests tomorrow like we see tonight, what are your actions on Monday?
Well, we've got to get through tomorrow first. Each day is important because each day you build a better sense of what people are thinking. You get more dialogue going. I can't say what Monday will be like, but tomorrow morning I know we start with talking with everyone that we can and getting the neighborhood, the faith leaders, the activist community to say this is how we can protest, and this to be clear about the rules of engagement in some respects, because the rules of engagement start off with respecting people where they are.
Yeah. Well, Mayor, I know that one of the things that I keep seeing, not only on TV, but also social media, that we hear people talking about, people are concerned about their sons. Specifically because of, and when I say people concerned about their sons, I'm talking about specifically African-American women are concerned about their boys, whether they're little boys or they're grown men. And I know you have a son. There are people who don't really understand this. There are people who may have a hard time understanding what that concern or what that fear might be. I know you have a son. Can you express to us or maybe share with us what goes through your mind as a mother of a black man when you see this kind of protest and this kind of reaction and this kind of event?
It's very real to me. My son, when he was at Chapel Hill in school, was arrested for an armed robbery because he had dreadlocks, primarily. And he was identified by the person that said he had been robbing him. And what saved him was a credit card receipt that showed that he had signed a credit card in a different location from what happened. And honestly, there's even talking about it right now sends chills through my body.
Wow. And what year was this, Mayor?
Without that, this was, he's pretty old now. He's got children of his own, so I'm not going to say that. But I
asked the question, and I know.
Oh, he was a junior at Chapel Hill when this happened.
I asked that question because this is something this is not brand new. This is a conversation and a concern that has existed for a very long time. That's why I asked the question, not necessarily to put you on the spot. But yeah, I mean, this is an issue, and it's very real to you. And I know that this is your city, this is your town, this is our city, and this is something that's very close to you, whether it involves your son, but specifically, you can identify with this particular issue.
I can, and this is what I say, that it's very difficult to have to sit down with your son, your black son, and say, something is going on here. I need you to be extra careful right now. I need you to understand how to interact with the police department. And that's just reality for many of us. It's just, that's the way it is. And people often say, well, you're the mayor, your son doesn't have to go through that. Well, my son went through that, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, and people have also heard the police chief, the current police chief of this city, talk about the tightness that he experiences in his own stomach when police are behind him when he's driving. He's the police chief. So it's very real for a bunch of people who you might not think could even experience or identify with this.
Well, we're looking at the worst of it, where you have a loss of life. But this kind of thing happens when, our kids walk through stores and they're followed to see whether or not there's an assumption sometimes by the color of your skin. And we have to deal with that. We just have to deal with it.
Yeah. What would you tell people who may have a hard time understanding what this is about? Because obviously it seems if people don't really understand why people would be so upset across the country over what happened in Minneapolis, they would be so upset in other areas. This is a deeper issue. How do you begin to, as the leader of a city that is diverse, how do you begin to allow people to understand that?
Well, I'm very grateful for the efforts of things like sessions on race matters. I'm very relieved when we can have this kind of dialogue, and I can say this, and people can understand that it's not just those people. It's the people that they interact with every day. So for that, I am very grateful for the efforts that we have around equity and justice and dealing with racism. So that's how I have hope. That's what makes me say that Charlotte can be a place that can be a model for other cities. It's while we may not be perfect, we never stop trying.
Yeah. And we're grateful for your time this evening. Vi Lyles, Mayor of Charlotte. Thank you so much for taking the time in the midst of all of this unfolding to talk to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you allowing us to speak up like this. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to go now to Vanessa Rufus, who's been standing by, who has been monitoring the social media aspect. We heard Brianna Harper talk about people with their cell phones who were walking past this police line at the perimeter of the protest area, and I know that you've talked about some things that you've seen people tweeting. What can you tell us now about what you're seeing?
Yeah, we actually, we're seeing a lot of chatter on Twitter about Braxton Winston. You mentioned one of the arrests that had been made as a Charlotte City Councilman. So I'm seeing a lot tweeting about that. People just wanting to know why he was arrested and where he is, and so that is definitely getting a lot of attention. I am getting word that we've got some video that our crews have been gathering. That video has been put together so we can kind of give you a glimpse of what has been transpiring through the evening through our camera's eyes. So let's go ahead and take you there. We're first looking here at CMPD officers. This is them in riot gear. They are getting a command to put their gas masks on, and this is before they apparently deploy smoke bombs to disperse the crowd. So we see them at first kneeling down. They're putting the masks on. They're getting their face shields on and marching, and this is right outside the CMPD substation along Beatties Ford Road near Uptown Charlotte. Another piece of video that we're getting, this was taken just a few minutes later. It shows the same police in riot gear beginning to advance on protesters. They are in what appears to be a tight formation with their shields up, and we're told the goal of this operation was apparently to push the crowd back down the street and away from the police station on Beatties Ford Road. And we were seeing a lot of pictures on social media that folks had taken beforehand where people were gathering there in large groups outside the police station. And even police had come out and kind of made a little bit of a barricade, a human barricade, if you will, near the front doors. And so eventually this is what transpired, that video that we just showed you. I guess important to mention too, while it is pretty surreal to see these glimpses of video with the police and the riot gear and kind of coming into formation, that this is just a snapshot of these demonstrations, and not all of the demonstrations we've seen required that. I mean, I have seen lots of pictures and video on social media where it's just people gathered and they've got their fists up in the air together and they're just kind of together in solidarity, and they have their signs, or they're saying names, and really it is about coming together. So what we're seeing with these, you know, in some cases arrests and police getting the riot gear on is really just a piece of what's been going on tonight. Fred.
All right, Vanessa Rufus reporting for us. Thank you, Vanessa. I want to go now to Brianna Harper, who is joining us live from the perimeter. And Brianna, it looks like you've also put on a mask as well. What's changed between now and the last time we talked?
Well, Fred, we have been able to make our way a little bit further down Beatties Ford, and a larger crowd of people have kind of gathered around us. Right now, you can still see this barricade line of officers in their riot gear, trying to kind of keep this crowd from a bay. And at first, it was very calm and kind of collected, but then this gentleman in this pickup truck pulled up, and he asked officers if he could come through to tow a car. Of course, they told him no, that is not a possibility. And then he became very enraged and started screaming and yelling, and that kind of got everyone else a little bit agitated here as well. So now people are just kind of a standoff. This pickup truck here, several folks out here with their camera phones out, recording on Facebook Live, Instagram, as Vanessa had mentioned before. This is all being documented on social media across the country, just experiencing what everyone's seeing in different cities across the area. It looks like some of the officers here are actually kind of taking off their riot gear for whatever reason, or kind of on bended knee. I'm not sure what their game plan is right now, but there doesn't seem to be any agitation with their protesters, which is good news. So maybe they're kind of falling back or kind of taking a step back from this at this point. So that is good news to see. Fred.
Okay, Brianna Harper live from the scene there. If you were just now joining us, I know a lot of people have dipped in and out of our coverage, but we've been on this now for a good bit. This is the reaction, the fallout from what started as a peaceful protest just outside of the Metro Division. This is in West Charlotte, just up the street from the Northwest School of the Arts on Beatties Ford Road. And right now, things escalating to property damage, slashed tires, broken windows from the West Charlotte Metro Division. And now you see a line of officers prepared to clash with protesters. They haven't clashed, but they are prepared. That is the message, and they are trying their best from all accounts, from the mayor, from Malcolm Graham, and from other accounts that we've heard, and even from the Twitter account from CMPD News. They are trying to limit their encounter, their physical encounter with those protesters, and yet give them the freedom to express all of the anger, pain, and passion they have about what took place earlier this week. That is when George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis police officer, a knee on the neck for several minutes that led to his death, and the fallout and spark of emotion that we've seen across the country in cities like New York, Atlanta, Houston, Boston, Denver, and the list growing as the days grow of people, thousands of them in all of these cities protesting. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, police have contained that protest area to Beatties Ford, just in that perimeter near the Metro Division of the police department. But at this point, they say they've taken several people into custody. A lot of those folks taken in for property damage, I know. One of the things that we're working to find out, and we've gotten word of, is the detainment, at least, of our city councilor, Braxton Winston, who rose to his leadership position in the city after protests that took place in September of 2016 after Keith Scott was killed by police. I want to bring in our Hunter Sines, who has been on the ground from the very beginning. He's watched this thing kind of bubble up from being a calm and peaceful protest to what we see now. Hunter, what's the latest where you're standing?
Yeah, well, I actually just poked my head into the police department here and was asking, because we can only see what's in between the two lines of police officers and protesters, and the one of the leaders here at the police department at this Metro Division said that beyond both of these lines is, quote, a great number of protesters still out here tonight. And then within this neighborhood off of Beatties Ford Road, just west of Charlotte, I was told there are some larger pockets of 40 to 50 people spread out around here. That's why you see these lines of police officers creating these barriers on the intersections with Beatties Ford Road. Of course, that information coming from CMPD right here on scene, that there are still a great number of protesters out here. So although I will say right now it's eerily quiet, you don't hear a lot of noise from the protesters. I'm not seeing anything being thrown right now. This has to be the quietest that I have seen it. We see traffic going through this intersection now, but according to CMPD, there are still a number of protesters in this area that they are trying to disperse. We do know, like you said, moot that point, that these officers are moving from their location, opening that up again. About a couple of minutes ago, these officers in riot gear right behind me, they actually had a flashbang go off here. A woman protester was getting rather close, and they dispersed the area in between our last hit with you. And this whole area really came up with a bunch of smoke. We backed off. A lot of people started to disperse and back up a little, but like I just mentioned, there are still a number of protesters that they are trying to get control of out here, but it is still the most quiet atmosphere that I have seen since 6:30 this afternoon, Fred.
Yeah, a lot of action and things definitely calming down. We know that there are several protests scheduled this weekend. We know that Marshall Park will have a protest. We know that they will have a protest tomorrow. And we also know that there's another protest at Fountain Park in Rock Hill tomorrow at 11 a.m. They are calling for a protest against police brutality in both of those places. And so, like, this is just the beginning of the weekend. You see the map there on your screen of what we expect to be not only an emotional strain for people in the communities because of what they are expressing and experiencing at this point, but also a logistical, perhaps, strain, something that CMPD would otherwise not have to deal with, that's happening right now, happening this weekend. If you're just now joining us, we're showing you live pictures of a police line that's formed here. This is off of Beatties Ford, and they are containing protest from encounters that we saw earlier that got physical between police and the protesters. Several protesters taken into custody. Talk that many of them were from out of town and caused some agitation and trouble here in the Queen City. The point of the protest, though, not lost on George Floyd, who was killed earlier this week at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, which sparked protests across the country. Here in Charlotte, this is the first that we've seen like this, where you've seen about 300 protesters, more than 300 protesters, take to the streets, some with signs, everyone with chants, and everyone with at least a passion related to this issue. Who do we have here standing by, guys? Okay, I have Vanessa Rufus, who I think we want to check in with now. Vanessa, what are you seeing?
Checking in here with the social media feeds, actually starting to see some reports of protesters being ordered to disperse. Let's see here, update. Protesters who gathered earlier to march to Uptown here in Charlotte have been ordered to disperse by police. That seems to be falling in line with perhaps maybe what Hunter was saying, where he noticed it looked like some portions of barricades or even clusters of officers were starting to leave the area where he was at. The same person, Isabella Brooks, reporting also small explosions and fires, saying protesters, please be safe. So still obviously pretty active out there in certain locations, and then in others maybe starting to lift a little bit with the activity. We are seeing a lot of tweets, as I mentioned before, about Braxton Winston. You'd mentioned, Fred, that we had gotten word that he had been either detained or maybe even arrested by police. And a lot of people seem to be wanting to know why that is, where they can find him, or even possibly even I'm seeing reports of people wanting to help bail him out. So you had mentioned, too, how he had kind of gained fame, you know, as being a part of protests in the past, and once again here he seems to be gaining some traction on Twitter with a lot of people who are following this storyline. We are seeing also some video here, looks like firecrackers going off. This was from several minutes ago, tweeted from Lauren Lindstrom, saying the police are advancing on Beatties Ford. Looks like I'm seeing a lot of smoke there, and some folks starting to kind of disperse away from that area where the smoke is kind of billowing away from. Watching now some of the earlier pictures, as we talked about in the past this evening, it looked like it started off largely with just a lot of gatherings and people you know, just kind of coming together in solidarity, and then we started to see things get a little bit raucous in some areas, but we just are seeing a lot of these earlier pictures with people in these signs and saying stand up for Charlotte, hashtag George Floyd, no justice, no peace, and you can really see, you know, how folks are really feeling their emotions here. We see groups of people with, once again, you know, kneeling, taking a knee on the ground. They have their fists raised in the air. They're together. They've got their signs up. It's some of their signs saying, "Stop killing us. White supremacy is the real virus." So just some of the things that we're seeing being vocalized and also being just expressed with their signage out in these demonstrations. So we'll continue to follow, and if I see anything else notable, of course, I'll let you guys know.
All right, thank you. Vanessa Rufus reporting live, telling us everything that she is seeing on social media. You can see that protest line still standing still there. I'm also perusing my social media feed as we've stayed on the air for extended time here. I've got a message here that I see where someone said, watching this, saying that they saw Braxton Winston snatched up and thrown down. They being the police, swarmed him like hornets. Again, we're working to figure out exactly why he was taken into custody. We know that there were several damage reports and that people were taken into custody for that reason. It'll be interesting to see why police took him into custody at this point. But things actually calming down at this moment. Earlier, we saw flashbangs with what appeared to be gas and other methods that police use to disperse and calm crowds during an occasion such as this. Right now, though, the police seem pretty calm. You're watching video now of police bringing people into custody. One of the questions that we were asking early on and that they appeared to answer, Malcolm Graham, one of the voices that we've heard say that some of these protesters aren't even Charlotteans. They're not from our community, but they have come from elsewhere to participate in this protest. And you can see some of the methods that police have used to disperse those crowds. I want to talk a little bit about these protesters who come from out of town, because that's something as a reporter It's worked in various locations in my career that I have been made aware of to watch out for. Usually you'll see protesters. I know it's very difficult during a time of a pandemic because a lot of people are wearing face coverings, but traditionally during a protest, it was a red flag if you saw someone out wearing something over their face because it meant they didn't want to be identified. It meant they really were up to something of a nefarious nature because they didn't want to be identified because they were going to do something to agitate the crowd. Like I mentioned earlier, in these situations, it is like a sporting event, and that you can feel the energy sucked up, or you can feel a spurt of energy that can move a crowd in a different direction. And one of the jobs of police, obviously, is to get ahead of that direction and try to contain the crowd. But also, part of being a journalist covering these type of events is anticipating where the crowd might go, where the mood might go, to stay out of harm's way, but also stay within proximity to cover this event effectively. And the agitators, the people who come from out of town, usually serve a purpose. And their purpose usually is to get the crowd off track, create more chaos, even during protests that are very organized, where people really just want to express their emotions and their feelings in a peaceful way. Sometimes these things can get out of hand when you have someone agitating the crowd. So it will be interesting to see if these protesters, if a great number of them who have been taken into custody have come from out of town. All right, we want to go to an interview now. Who do we have on the phone? We have Dr. Melvin Herring from Johnson C. Smith University. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Can you hear me? Okay. Pardon the technical difficulty. We'll get to him in a moment. But again, talking about these protesters that we've seen, some of them paraded into the Metro Division, presumably for property damage. That's the only thing that we've heard that police have had an issue with during this protest. But they are protesting the death of George Floyd, who was killed in Minneapolis by a police officer, a former police officer now, who has been charged with third-degree murder as of today. These protests going on across the country. We've seen video in Atlanta with images of buildings burning. We've seen video in Minneapolis with images of buildings burning. Here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we've seen confrontation with police where they've used what appears to be tear gas and other means to disperse and control crowds, but nothing nearly as violent as we've seen in other areas. But you heard the mayor. I spoke with the mayor just moments again. Do we have the doctor on the phone?
Yes.
Sir, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us this evening. What is your impression of everything that you were seeing tonight when you put it within context of what's going on across the country?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not surprised at the show and display of anger and protest. In my opinion, this is more than just the George Floyd, the death of this young man. I actually think that what we're seeing is an underlining of all of the oppression that marginalized people have been feeling for years. If you think about it, this isn't new. We've seen this time and time again with Eric Gardner and many of the other shooters, even what happened here with Keith Lamont Scott and the outpour and outcry from the community. The other thing is, I think that is very critical to take note is these crowds aren't just African American. These crowds are mixed, not only in terms of race, but age, gender, right? And so what we're seeing is this oppression, this connection of oppression amongst these various populations. I mean, this is all interwoven, if you ask me, with the Me Too movement and all of the other movements that we've seen. And so, not surprised at all. It's just the situation in Minneapolis and the situation in Georgia with Ms. Taylor and Mr. Arbery in Georgia, those are just catalysts for what we see in events like tonight.
Yeah, that was one of the topics that came up during the last major protest we saw back in 2016. It was that Charlotte was 50 out of 50 in that Harvard economist Raj Chetty's influential 2014 study that talked about how difficult it would be to pull yourself up out of poverty as an African-American male. And one of the points of conversation in the discourse around this debate was how bad that is in Charlotte, and how there were two Charlottes, and that there are a number of people at that time, at least in Charlotte, who were unaware of that, and how that would also play into the anger that you see playing out in a protest like this.
Absolutely. The crescent in Charlotte is real. If you look at the statistics, you look at the numbers, you look at where people are suffering, it is the same groups of people over and over again. And the irony in all of this is COVID-19 has ripped the scab off of this systemic oppression, and has really exposed across the overlaying and the various systems that continuously oppress various groups, and it is very obvious what's happened. But to the people that have suffered for decades and decades, this is not new.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting that you mentioned COVID-19. I mean, for 24 hours or 6 hours even, you forget that a pandemic is going on, because this seems to have stolen the headlines across the country. This is something that's been with us for a very long time in this country, and we're starting to see the disparities in healthcare, as you say, and also with the economy, the effect that's had. The famous saying that when America catches the cold, the African American community has the flu. Certainly, that's coming up as well. So I know this is such a major issue of enormity when we talk about race and you talk about police encounters. It's such a big issue. If I'm in your head, where do you think we start with trying to tackle this? I know there are several different things people can do, but where do we begin? And I want to ask that question framed around something more than a conversation, because we've been talking for a very long time, for generations. What do we actually do to improve this situation from your point of view?
The work that my colleagues and I have been engaged in with CMPD over the last several years is less about conversation and more about action around deconstructing the understanding and notion of inclusion. One of the bigger problems, for example, if you look at the George Floyd situation and you look at what was taking place in that video, one of the things that we've been working with CMPD officers on is how do you begin to deconstruct how you see people of difference. It is clear that the officers did not see Mr. Floyd as a human, if you will. There's no way that could have been a white man laying on the ground with a knee in his neck until asphyxiation. And I know that the original coroner report is not saying or supporting that. But what we're doing is we're teaching officers the process of how inclusion happens. So this overlay of power, privilege, and oppression, and how that lens has integrated it across all of our systems since the inception of all of our systems. And so when you walk into an institution and you engage a system, how do you identify where people are being excluded based on identities? And so to be able to do that and as an officer is critically important, because you have the responsibility of really deciding whether or not someone lives or dies. And in this case with Mr. Floyd, he wasn't as fortunate.
Yeah, it is such a complex issue, but we have to start somewhere. And each of us don't necessarily have to start in the same place, but we do have to start somewhere as a community. Dr. Melvin Herring, thank you so much for your insight and for talking to us this evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And if you're just now joining us, we've been having a conversation, and I do want to point out, we've talked a lot about the African-American community and the impact of this on the African-American community being a touch point of this, but in the fields right now, people protesting, we have seen very diverse crowds of people who are upset. They are just as upset as African-American people that this is something that continues to happen in this country. And so we've seen all kinds of people protesting and participating in tonight's protest here in Charlotte and in other places across the country. I do want to tell people that we've learned that there's some looting going on at Food Lion and Beatties Ford Road. So, I mean, we're starting to see more action, more things that we've seen in other places across the country. I want to bring in our Hunter Sines, who has been in the middle of all of this action all evening long. Hunter?
Yeah, hey there, Fred. I believe our colleague Brianna Harper is on her way en route there. Of course, we'll bring you a report as soon as she gets there. But I did want to touch on that this was a diverse group of people out here. We had even the former mayor out here, Jennifer Roberts. We had a CMS board member, Carol Sawyer, out here protesting peacefully at the beginning of this. So there was that diversity, and they all wanted to vocalize their pain to this police department, to police departments around the country, to our leaders of what they're feeling in the African-American community. Here is what our former mayor, Jennifer Roberts, had to say earlier this evening.
And, this pain is real. I have talked to so many of my friends, my black and brown friends, who are tired of seeing this killing continue. And, we are in a pandemic, we are in a crisis, people are hurting, they've lost loved ones, they've lost their jobs, and now we have racism rearing its ugly head once again.
And I also want to bring up an update. I know that we have reported that Councilmember Braxton Winston was arrested in these protests. We now know, as something is now being thrown this way, it was not. Okay, I apologize. It was the wind. No, I'm sorry. We're going to send it back to you.
All right, yeah, that's his live television for you during a protest. We have to be careful oftentimes of what we show on TV because people will sometimes yell obscenities, and that's what was happening there. You're taking a live look now. Is this Atlanta that we're seeing? No, this is Beatties Ford Road in West Charlotte. This is Atlanta right here. I believe that we're seeing this fire coming out of Atlanta, and this is the type of scene that we've seen in various places across the country that we haven't seen here in Charlotte, and we're thankful for it. And you heard the mayor and the city councilors who we've talked to express their gratitude and how impressed they were with police, that this was going the way that it's going, even though there has been some confrontation and there have been arrests. We haven't seen anything quite like this, but this is the scene in Atlanta, the same kind of thing we're seeing in places like Minneapolis as well, following the death of George Floyd. We've had a number of people that we've talked to giving insight really into why this is such a big deal, specifically in the community, the African-American community. And what do we have? What is this picture that we have here that we're showing? Okay, so we have more pictures of Atlanta coming in, that fire there, and presumably some protesters perhaps, or people who live in the neighborhood, and you see people holding up their phones, everyone posting these images elsewhere on social platforms. This is what we're seeing, and this is what people do these days. Everyone expresses their passion and their emotions and feelings about current events on social media in real time, so we get a good barometer of the country's emotional state right now as they process all of this. I want to go live now to our Brianna Harper, who is on Beatties Ford Road in West Charlotte. Brianna, what are we seeing here?
Well, Fred, we just made our way right near the shopping center on Food Line. I want you guys to turn around and see this line of officers on bicycles blocking the entrance to the shopping center. We're getting reports that possibly folks have broken into the Food Line here. There is a Chinese restaurant that folks may have broken into. It's hard for us to see because we're being kept back from a distance. But I do see flashing lights in this parking lot. I have seen a number of emergency vehicles with their sirens on, speeding down Beatties Ford, trying to respond to this. As you can see above me and here, there's also the chopper in the sky. They have the spotlight down on folks as well. We're going to try to cross the street here to kind of give you guys a little bit more of an up-close look at what you're seeing here. A lot of folks here, some blocking the traffic along Beatties Ford, but most on the sidewalk, kind of coming toe-to-toe with the officers who have this area surrounded with bicycles kind of as a perimeter to keep folks from entering into the shopping center. We're going to try to walk around this corner here to get a better look at what the entrance to the Food Line looks like, what the entrance to the other businesses, to see if anything as far as damage or anything looks like from this vantage point here. Okay, so it looks like they have a line of officers right at this entrance to the Food Line, kind of a band of them all lined up. I don't see, it doesn't appear that anyone's inside. It doesn't really look like there's any light. Well, there's lights on inside, but it doesn't appear like anyone is actually inside the Food Line at this point, which is good news. It looks like officers have that under control. And let's see here. Yeah, so they just have this control line of officers surrounding the Food Line with their car, the lights in the background. It doesn't like any protesters have been able to make their way this close, which is good news. They've been able to contain everyone and keep them from a distance on Beatties Ford Road. So it looks like the situation here all along Beatties Ford at the Food Line has been contained. Okay, now that we're getting a little bit closer, we can actually see the windows of the Food Line have been smashed. So it looks like someone attempted to break into the Food Line here. I don't know if they had any success at actually getting inside. I think officers were able to react quick enough to keep from people actually getting inside and looting, like the scenes we've seen all across the country and cities everywhere of folks getting inside, damaging businesses. They were able to do some damage here, but luckily it looks like they weren't actually able to steal anything, which is absolutely good news. Probably from quick action from CMPD.
And excuse me if you've answered this question, but do we know if anyone was in that Food Line at the time? Was it occupied or was it vacant?
I believe the Food Line was closed when this all happened, but when they broke the glass, I don't think anyone was able to get inside, which is a good thing. So we're kind of keeping a distance from the police line that they have here set up to keep people from getting any closer.
Okay, Brianna Harper reporting live from Beatties Ford Road in West Charlotte, where that Food Line has suffered some damage, and now police are surrounding it, making sure that nothing can be stolen from it. Thank you, Brianna, for that report. I think now I have someone on the phone. Do I have Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eisel on the phone?
Yes, hi there.
Hi, Julie. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know this has been a busy evening for all of our city leaders who are in contact with one another and closely watching the events. What's your impression of everything that you've seen play out here in Charlotte when you look at what's happening elsewhere?
Well, I had heard this. I was getting messages that this could happen from other city leaders in Memphis, Louisville, Columbus. I was on a call today that it started happening last night, peaceful protests that were erupting into violence, and for the most part, a lot of them were saying that this was coming from the outside. So as I contacted city community leaders today, a lot of them weren't aware that this was going to happen. So it's something a little bit different than what we've seen. It's awful. It's scary. It's not unexpected. And it's just, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, I know from work that I've done and work that you've done, that there's work here in Charlotte with community engagement, where there are community leaders, not necessarily people who are affiliated with police departments, but other entities, maybe barbershops even, who have a good pipeline of information about when these types of things are going to happen and how well they can communicate with people who might be participating or experiencing these emotions. I know that has to be scary, when you do the kind of work that you've done on engagement, to not be in the know that something like this is happening.
Right, and not just city leaders, but these community leaders were not in the know. I spoke to Councilmember Graham at 5 o'clock tonight, and I said, I'm hearing that something's going to happen on Beatties Ford Road tonight, and he didn't know that. And, some of the community activists didn't know this was going to happen. But it's following a pattern that I'm seeing, that I heard starting yesterday was happening in other cities.
Interesting.
With regards to attacking police stations in communities of color.
Interesting. I wonder, and I'm just asking a question out loud. I'm wondering, if this is the mark of people who are planning these who don't live here. I mean, if community members who are part of grassroots organizations and they have their ear to the ground constantly don't know about this, then what does that say to you?
Well, that's what I was hearing on the call at 4 p.m. tonight, and that's when I started calling some of my local people that I have relationships with locally, saying, are you hearing this? Because leaders in Phoenix, Columbus, Louisville are saying these people are coming from out of town. Our community leaders are taking a little bit off guard. And that's different than what we've seen in the past. Certainly the frustration and the anger is understandable, but in the past we've really relied on our local community leaders to process that anger and to react to it. Not that you can always react to it in a way that's going to prevent people from being, from outbreaks and from protests, but they were taken off guard by this. And so I think you have to, at some point we're going to have to be able to separate why this happened from local frustration, because all we can do is deal with what's happening here locally. We can't speak to what's happening in cities across the country. We've got to address our own home.
Are you aware? Are city leaders aware? It seems that they are. I talked to the mayor earlier. It seems that you guys are aware of the protests that are scheduled in Charlotte this weekend. You're aware of those protests, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we were aware of protests because, the CMPD talks to these community leaders, and of course, the goal is to make them to be peaceful protests while giving people the opportunity and the right to express how they're feeling. And there's no doubt. I mean, it's just the events that have happened in the past couple weeks are a buildup, to the frustration and the anger that's been there. And it's been so egregious that you just have to kind of figure out how to process it. But it's a whole different layer of complication when you have people coming in from the outside that you don't know how to deal with them.
How would you, I want to ask you one more question. How are you processing this in your position? How are you doing?
It's emotional. It's hard. I'm white, right? So I can't process it the same way. So I'm trying to figure out how to be part of the solution and how to be part of the process in a way that's very different than my colleagues who are brown and black. And it's different for every one of us, but the color of our skin can't prevent us from leaning into it and figuring out how each one of us can play a role in addressing this. Fixing it is too grand of a term. It's just addressing it. And how do we address it? And how do we try to get us all on the path where at least we can work together, towards something better.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. We all have different giftings and talents to bring to the table. Mayor Pro Tem Julie Eisel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Fred. Appreciate it.
You bet. I want to bring in our Brianna Harper, who is live. She was live near that Food Lion off of Beatties Ford Road. Brianna, what's the latest?
So, Fred, officers have moved from the entrance to the food line a little bit closer to the street of Beatties Ford Road, and on the other side of this is the protesters kind of facing off with them. Closer to the road, you can see officers on bikes, and some of the protesters are kind of interacting with them, trying to have conversations. Other folks are just yelling and try to voice their frustrations with this whole situation. So, again, this whole scene started when there were windows broken out at this food line as well as the Asian restaurant right next door. A lot of property damage, but at this point, it doesn't look like anyone actually made their way inside the store to steal anything, which is good news. So it seems like CMPD officers do have this situation contained at this point, keeping folks on the road and out of the shopping center to prevent any other businesses from being broken into or any further damage in this situation. So this is definitely still a very fluid situation that we're seeing here. Earlier we heard a flashbang, and that kind of made the crowd scatter a bit distance from the line of officers here, and there's kind of a separation between police and protesters while the yelling and kind of the frustrations continue to be vocalized that you can see here, Fred.
All right, Brianna Harper reporting for us this evening. I want to bring in Sheriff of Mecklenburg County, Gary McFadden. Sheriff, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
Here.
Well, first of all, I want to really thank you for taking the time, because I know that you are a man who doesn't like to do too much talking. You like to do. We've had lots of conversations about this, specifically this topic, trying to prevent this from happening. What's your take on what's happening this evening?
Well, it is disheartening. I spent my morning with 4 or 5 other sheriffs in another county. We actually did a video saying that we denounce the action of these officers in Minneapolis, and we're going to take a stand against that. We're going to be very vocal about it. This is taken a lot away from our cultures, the careers that we love, and we will continue to denounce the action of these officers in Minneapolis and across America, because that's what we need to do, and that's what we were doing. Unfortunately, today I went to Beatties Ford Road myself, and I talked to residents myself, and I saw a very peaceful demonstration. I saw people who were very vocal, which they should be. They talked to the officers, and here's why I believe that we need to have more conversations. A young lady walked up to me that I know very well, that her son was in an officer-involved shooting and lost his life many, many years ago. And I was part of that investigation. She came up to me, we had a great conversation, and I said, ma'am, why don't you have a mask on? And I gave her a mask, and we had a conversation, and she has my cell phone that she has had for the last 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
These are things that we need to continue to do. But what we have to do is take a look at this incident with the news footage earlier. This was a peaceful demonstration. People were very vocal, which they have a right to be, and they should be. And they're very upset, and they have a right to be, and they should be for Mr. George Floyd. But then you have to look at the demographics, and the people were there.
Yeah.
And what this has occurred is that certain groups with backpacks, with ulterior motives and an agenda, went to Beatties Ford Road, excited the emotions of these people and the crowd, and now they have left and going wherever they came from back, and now we are having the people who live on Beatties Ford Road or around Beatties Ford Road are there now having the confrontation with the law enforcement officer.
Wow.
That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
That is unacceptable.
Yeah, you're talking about the agitators that I've mentioned a number of times this evening. What does that say that that they're able to do that, even because, I mean, obviously we're looking at it from the outside and we can see it as broadcasters, newscasters covering these things, we can see what's happening. But it seems that these agitators are effective at throwing the narrative off track when it comes to what the people who live in these communities want to get across when they have protest. How does that happen?
Well, it's right. Here's what we should do. We should take the film footage that the news station has and go into these auditoriums and go into these arenas and say, okay, see what we have here now. Look who's coming. Look who's coming. When the people there on Beatties Ford Road, who are great people, that's where I went to school, that's where I eat, that's where I still hang out, and that's why I went there, because I got a call from someone that said, hey, they're coming to the precinct. I went there and saw a lot of people that I knew, very peaceful. Sure, they should chant. Sure, they should say what they say because they're very upset, and these are the unheard voices during these times. So when the agitators come Anybody who did not see that and witness that is given a false narrative. Then, when nightfall, the agitators leave, and then we are having these people now arrested. And I'm very concerned about that, and we need to be clear on that. Yes, we have a problem with community and law enforcement. That is why several sheriffs got together and said, we have to speak out, and we have to stand for the communities that we have been elected by and make sure that they understand. And I sent out the video today that said, we denounce the actions of these officers, such as in Minneapolis. But what I'm seeing now is it's taking everything away from what we're trying to build.
Yeah.
I'm concerned now, and I know I sound excited because I'm very upset about it.
Yeah.
Now I'm concerned because all of these people are going to flood my detention center and my arrest process, which we have kept COVID-19 free for 3 months.
Yeah.
We do not have one single person out of 1,600 residents with COVID-19, but now we have to put a whole nother process in with this demonstration and protest.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So we have to be honest about it, but we also have to take people who are ready to lead, not in leadership positions. We need to take people who are ready to lead, and some people probably need to sit on the sideline and watch what we do to move us forward and stop holding us hostage in these situations. What I mean is we're having these conversations, but they're not real conversations about how can we move on.
Yeah.
We expected this. We knew it was going to happen, but we have to be honest. We have to have the better conversations in this and actually do the work. Actually do the work.
Mm-hmm. Are you in front of a TV screen? Can you see our programming? I'm wondering.
I've been watching it since, believe it or not, I have been watching it since I woke up because I travel and dealing with this.
I just want to see, can we re-rack that video where they're taking the protesters, the few protesters, they're taking them into the police department. There's maybe 4 or 5. Okay, if you're watching right now, Sheriff, if you can see who they have arrested here and they've taken these folks into custody, I don't know if you can see this video. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Do those look like people who live in that neighborhood?
No, it does not.
You don't think so?
No, sir. And you're going to say, people are going to say, well, how do you know? Well,
I know how you know. That's why I'm asking you. But you can go ahead and tell everyone else.
Because I came here. I know Beatties Ford Road. I know where Nikki is. I go to West Charlotte and speak. And I know my people on that side of the city. I know where A and B Avenue is. I know where Magnolia Garden is. I know where the store that they looted. And so when these people incite our emotions, because we are upset. When I say we are, because I'm upset, we are upset. The people are upset about what goes on with the young man in Georgia and Mr. Floyd. And they want to voice their opinion. But when you mix these emotions with our emotions, and that's what they're doing, they're mixing their agenda with our emotions, and then all of a sudden they back out. You know, I didn't see anybody that I know from Beatties Ford Road with a backpack.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody from Beatties Ford Road with their face 90% covered.
Yeah.
And so it's a time to say, well, I can cover my face because of COVID-19. Well, you just took advantage of you just took advantage of the crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. Sheriff McFadden, former CMPD, or I should say retired CMPD detective, now Sheriff of Mecklenburg County. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I know you're a doer, and as you say, there's a lot of work ahead of us in our community to prevent things like this from happening. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this evening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, I want to go live now. I think Brianna Harper is standing by. Is that right? Brianna Harper? She's standing by on Beatties Ford Road. You've been watching the developments outside of this Food Lion. What are you seeing at this point?
Yeah, Fred, this situation just kind of continues to develop. The officers continue to move closer and closer to Beatties Ford Road, and then as a result, they're getting closer and closer to the protesters who are lined up on the street here. Kind of as the frontline force, there's the bicycle police officers who are kind of in the first perimeter, and then the second perimeter line of officers kind of blocking the shopping center as a guard so folks aren't able to get in and cause any damages, further damage that is, to the businesses in this shopping center. If you're just now joining joining us. We were out here earlier basically because the food line in the shopping center, the windows have been completely smashed out. All the front windows of the food line have been smashed out. So officers wanted to make sure that no one was able to get inside of that store and to loot like we've seen all across the country and cities throughout today. So that was the main point of officers here, to keep people from getting inside those businesses. And as you can see, they've done a good job of that. They've done a good job of keeping the strong barricade and keeping people out of the shopping center. So now it's essentially a standoff. The police officers here and the protesters lining Beatties Ford Road, and those conversations, those vocal, shouts and screams continue as well, Fred.
Yeah, and one of the techniques we see the police staying there stoically is not to agitate or make people any more upset than they already are. You saw one of the men there as you were talking. I don't know if you could tell, but we saw an image of a man standing really, really close to police officers, but they aren't flinching and they aren't moving. That's part of the strategy and the technique that they use to not agitate the crowd any more than they already are as they chant.
And Fred, if you can take a listen, yeah, right now they're chanting, "I can't breathe." Of course, this has been the last words that we remember from Mr. George Floyd, who lost his life in Minneapolis. So they're kind of chanting this phrase in honor of him, in tribute to them. And of course, this whole protest, this whole outrage revolves around that police officer involved death that has really rocked the entire nation in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, the emotions certainly felt in the community here in Charlotte, and demanding a police presence even at this point, even at this hour now. They've been at this protesting for about 6 hours now, and things still emotionally charged at this point. Brianna, thank you. If you are just now following us now, we've been following this development outside of the Metro Division. Protests taking place there, and we've been off of Beatties Ford Road there. You just saw our Brianna Harper reporting about what had taken place at a food line there, had been broken into, and police securing that and holding the line there. I want to bring in our Vanessa Rufus, who's been following the latest trends on social media, following everything that's happening in Charlotte tonight. Vanessa?
Yeah, Fred, a lot of people actually talking about this looting on Twitter. Some people saying it's extremely sad to see. One person saying they live within just a couple miles of that area, says it's just making me so sad to watch this. And another person tweeting back saying, I'm from there. People on Beatties Ford have gone without and have been mistreated for a long time. They just don't care anymore. So there's definitely a dialogue going on about the looting that's been reported over in that particular area. But you had mentioned, that this demonstration has been going on for hours at this point, and the protesters to keep going. And this is going to be a couple more days of demonstrations. So we've got some that are scheduled to go on throughout the weekend. So we can go ahead and take a look at those right now. We know that there's going to be one scheduled for 11 o'clock in the morning. It's a Black Lives Matter march for George Floyd. That is, we're told, going to start over at Fountain Park. That's in Rock Hill. We also know that there's going to be an afternoon into the evening protest that's scheduled. That's called a protest against police brutality. That will be located over at CMPD headquarters over on East Trade in the Charlotte area. And then yet another event that will be scheduled. This is a White Allies event located over at Marshall Park in Charlotte. That one's scheduled to start around noon and it will go until 2. But like you mentioned, Fred, this evening, this is going on for hours and hours today, and it's starting off relatively peaceful and kind of escalating in certain pockets and with some people. So time will tell what we will see with these other demonstrations, but to bring back and circle back with some of the dialogue that we're seeing on social media, it really is kind of splitting people. It's kind of tearing people apart. Some people are really distraught to see what's been escalating here in the Charlotte area, and other people saying that this is how people are expressing themselves, and this has been a time coming. So of course, we'll just continue to follow and see what the day holds tomorrow. We'll certainly have crews out there and we'll bring everybody the latest. Fred.
Yeah, this is a fluid situation that we expect to see a lot of movement on this weekend. Vanessa, thank you. I want to bring in Brianna Harper once again. Brianna, we saw some action happening behind you. What's going on?
Well, Fred, they just released the flashbang that, of course, makes the entire crowd disperse. But then we came back here closer to the food line and realized that yet another business has been broken into here. This wireless cell phone store seems to be another victim of someone smashing the windows and trying to get inside a business. So now that makes 3 businesses here in this Food Line shopping center with damage to their property, glass broken into, and officers are trying their best to contain the situation. You can hear the siren or the security alarm in that Food Line just continues to go off as those smashed windows was a result of that. You can see this line of officers here looking to kind of protect this area while the rest of their force is closer to Beatties Ford Road, trying to keep those protesters as far away from this area as possible. Fred?
Do you know where they were headed? I think in the preview before we came to you, I was kind of multitasking, trying to pay attention. They ran in a certain direction. Where did they go? Do you know? Those protesters.
It looked like they were heading, the protesters, it looked like they were kind of heading away, but it looks like the officers that are here at the back of the parking lot are actually moving their way forward. So the rest of the officers here, I guess they're kind of mobilizing to make sure they have as many people closer to the front where the majority of the protesters seem to stage as well. So we're going to try to follow them to see what their plan of action might be here moving forward.
Okay, Brianna Harper, please stay safe out there. Thank you for your reporting. You're doing a great job. I think I want to check in now back to our Vanessa Rufus. Is that right? No, we're not. Okay, we're going to stay on this picture right here. It looks like police are forming a line heading in that direction. These are still the images, I think. Are these the images near the food line, or is this another image I'm seeing here? This is the image near the food line that was broken into. Police still forming that line, and you see engagement there during these kinds of protests. The engagement that takes place is very important because, again, this affects the emotion, the collective emotion that takes place in the crowd, which can then control the outcome and flow of protest. I think we have City Councilor Tark Bakari. Is that correct?
Hey, how are you?
Hey, pretty good. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk this evening. I know this has been a very busy and unnerving, to say the least, thing to watch play out in the city. What are your impressions of everything that you're seeing so far?
Well, I mean, it's a little too much reminiscent of 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one terrible thing. But when you look at, if you look for a small silver lining, 4 years of our police department, of our men and women in uniform that protect us every day, also getting trained on the techniques to handle what they had to face in 2016 even better.
Yeah,
I saw that firsthand on the front lines. The use of paintball guns and of tactics that made sure to disperse crowds, allow for free speech, but also make sure that there weren't any unintended fatal consequences. So super proud of those guys and ladies doing their job. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is a terribly sad situation that people are right to be outraged. People are right to want and be able to protest. There's just a big, big difference between protesting and making sure people hear your voice loud and clear and doing damage to your city, to your reputation, to over 10,000 small businesses that are reeling from the quarantine and the economic impacts of COVID-19. And now this is what they have to face.
Yeah.
It's just not right. And to be honest, it's not acceptable.
Yeah, it definitely exacerbates the impact of the economy and COVID-19. Do you buy the idea that there are people coming from out of town who participate in these protests, who are predominantly responsible for the unrest, or does that rest solely with the people in this community?
I mean, again, it's too soon to make a snap judgment on that, but we saw it happen in 2016.
Yeah.
We've seen it happen before, so there's no doubt that that's possible. There's no doubt that we're seeing foreign influences on social media right now do exactly what they did in 2016. So I think we have to take it with a grain of salt, knowing that it's there, and be a little skeptical until the truth is out there. I think, but we also have to realize that the world is rife with conspiracy theories all over the place, many of which that ended up proven untrue. So I saw a lot of local kind of vibe, kind of styled stuff when I was there in person tonight. And while they could have been out of town and things like that, I had no indication of thinking it was a right-wing, out-of-town, open NC group like has been floated or other things like that. Like, everyone needs to just calm down with the conspiracy theories. Let everyone kind of let everything they're trying to do soak in, and we'll figure this out on the back end. Right now, we got to get control of the situation. Yeah, it sounds like a number of people on the ground didn't know about this protest, that it would happen the way that it has. I had this conversation with a couple of your colleagues, and I know that when you talk about racism, when you talk about the feelings that we have about, what that means in terms of law enforcement, and some of the conversations that people have said have happened that have, this is kind of a bubbling up of several issues that can cause frustration for people protesting at this point about this particular one incident that seemed to be the tipping point in Minneapolis. When you think about all of that, and you know that this is a big issue, how does Tark Pakari bring his gifts and talents to the table? And I mean, what do you think from your point of view? Because I know there's not one fix, there's not two fixes, there's several, hundreds of fixes. What do you think? What do you think we should be doing more of that we're not doing, or that maybe we can improve upon? Well, I mean, it's an impossible question to answer because, to your very point, it is. There's no one person or one topic or one answer that's going to solve it. Well, from your point of view, it's an entire community. Yeah, I'm asking from your point of view. What do you do? From my, well, I mean, so here's what I did tonight, and it was a reaction, which was my wife and I were sitting at our kitchen table, watching this on live stream go down, and we were sad and upset. We understood why people were protesting, and we very much backed them and understood why they would want to do that, to make sure everyone heard the message loud and clear. However, we saw every single camera pointed at the line of police officers. We saw every narrative we were looking at live streamed and on the news about, oh, well, police force is here and flashbangs are occurring and tear gas is out. And I didn't see a single camera really pointed back towards those that were throwing water bottles and projectiles at those police officers who were just trying to do their job and get home safe. Yeah. So I jumped in my car and turned my camera live stream down there the other direction, because I didn't want tomorrow us to all wake up and that be the only narrative. So I think my whole point, response to your question there is that we each need to make sure that the complete story is told, and that we comprehend and soak in and respect every angle and figure out what the holistic picture is, not one myopic view of any of these things. Yeah, and I completely agree with you, which is why I asked the question, what you do, because I do know that, there are so many things that each and every one of us as people on this earth bring to the table. Surely there are that many solutions to a problem that can help move in the right direction. So the fact that you would do that, and that you would notice that, and that it would be important to tell the complete narrative, which, by the way, is important to me as a newscaster, to get as much of the complete picture as possible out there. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I know this is difficult to process, and we really appreciate it. Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. If you were just now following us, we are taking all of this in real time, just like you. Protesters clashing with police at this point in the 6th hour here in West Charlotte. All of this starting at the Metro Division with windows being broken and tires from police cruisers being slashed, and all kinds of property damage, leading to the apprehension of several protesters at this point, including one of our city councilors. And now, this is still going on. I want to bring in our Vanessa Rufus, who has been really watching closely everything that's happening on social media. Vanessa, what's the latest of what you're seeing? Are any changes in trending?
I had mentioned before, Fred, that there was a lot of Twitter traffic going on about, you had mentioned, one of our city council members here in Charlotte, Braxton Winston, who had been taken into custody, and a lot of people were tweeting wanting to know why he had been arrested and the circumstances behind that. I did want to let you know I did find some information here. It looks like we have his mugshot and some information just based on the booking that we have through MCSO. So it does look like he was arrested this evening. This was around 8 o'clock. And the arresting agency there, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police, looks like the description of the charges here is failure to disperse upon command. So presumably police here saying that perhaps they were trying to get him to move from a certain location and not dispersing from that area. That's the basic description we have of these charges. Looks like a bond has been set over at $1,000 for this misdemeanor. So that is the information that we have. We have also just been following various accounts of how that arrest went down. Once again, this is information coming from people on Twitter who say that they were there or that they know him and they were watching when this happened. But various reports of either officers swarming him, there's one person who's reporting that he was taken to the ground. Another person saying that they grabbed him and dragged him back into their files, presumably the police making some sort of line, breaking the line, grabbing him and bringing him back into that formation. So there are some reports here from witnesses that are similar or in line with each other. But once again, the latest here is City Council member Braxton Winston. We've been able to confirm here, arrested for what police say is failure to disperse on command. Fred.
Wow. Thank you for that update. I know a lot of people have been wondering, and I have also read some of those reports about what happened too. Thank you, Vanessa, for that. I want to bring in Senator Jeff Jackson into our conversation now. Senator, can you hear me?
I can, Fred.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this evening. What do you think of everything that's happening and how it's playing out in Charlotte?
Well, I've been watching your coverage, and I just want to say there might be people at home right now who are confused by the level of anger, who don't really understand where it's coming from. If you're in that camp, I really advise you to watch the video of the killing of Mr. Floyd, because it's the type of thing that deserves to shock the national conscience, and people have every right to be angry. It depicts an act so plainly and intensely unjust as to take a very divided country, a very polarized country, and unite all of us, because it was clearly an act of brutality and malice. So that's where this anger is coming from, and it's completely understandable.
Yeah.
Now you get the question of people breaking out windows in a Food Lion, and that's not civil protest, right?
No.
That's vandalism, and that's not going to further any political cause. I don't think people understand how much political power protesters have right now, because the whole country is going to agree with them.
Yeah.
Like, this was a horrendous act. So don't take the political power that you have to create real change, not just political change, but cultural change. In a moment, the whole country is going to see. Don't let other actors come in and undermine it by busting up a Food Lion. There's no reason for that. That doesn't help anything.
How do you think what does this say about, or does it say anything about Charlotte, that this is the way that we've responded, and given, the history that we've had, the recent history that we've had, and everything that happened in 2016 with a huge protest in uptown Charlotte? Is there a message that, or is there anything that we can take from this? Because there will be lots of discussions. There will be, there will be panels. There will be stories that we do. There will be lots of topics following this, I'm sure. From your point of view, and I know it's early in the process, but what do you think the takeaway is?
After Keith Lamont Scott in Charlotte, you're absolutely right. We had a moment of introspection. We had a number of discussions. We had think tanks come in and say what we should do, and then there just wasn't the follow-through on enough action items. We did take pretty good action, and the city council's been good with affordable housing, But if we put together a checklist of things that we need to do to address deeper issues, not just police tactics, but deeper issues of inequality, and frankly, we just haven't taken enough action. We haven't taken enough action on those action items. And that's going to be the takeaway coming out of this. It's okay, let's pick up where we left off and get serious about executing on some of these priorities.
Yeah, you're the first person.
And I want to say something about Braxton.
Okay, sure.
I've been watching your coverage about Braxton. Braxton is a friend of mine. I know him personally, and I've seen him operate in these situations before. He is a responsible actor. He is, in these situations, there to keep people safe, there to make it an act of civil protest. He is not a man of violence at all, and I look forward to his release. Absolutely.
I know Braxton as well, and I'm very interested to hear his take on what happened, given his history and also given his temperament. I mean, you know him. His temperament is he's a pretty level-headed and measured person, and I'm interested to hear his account of what happened. I was going to say you're the first person I've heard mention affordable housing in all of this. Which, when you talk about all of the underlying issues that make this what it is right now, at least in Charlotte, affordable housing is a huge issue. How does that play into something like this?
Affordable housing determines the contours of a society and the cultural and economic borders and makeup of a community. And we think a lot of people hear affordable housing attached to events that they're watching on your screen right now, and they think, well, there's a disconnect there. This isn't about affordable housing. This is about the police. This is about a riot or a protest. It is amazing how many of these systemic issues find their root in whether or not people can feel secure and feel safe in their home. And Charlotte, one of the worst American cities when it comes to this, for a lot of reasons having to do with our history and zoning. It was not an accident that this city was made to be very difficult for low-income people and people of color to have a safe, secure place to live. It just wasn't an accident. It's a product of our history, and you're going to see events like we see tonight come as a direct result.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a very comprehensive issue just under the belly of what we're seeing. This is literally the tip of the iceberg, this protest, given the conversations I've had with all of the community leaders this evening during our coverage. Senator Jeff Jackson, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us and shed some insight onto some of the deeper issues of what this means for Charlotte. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fred.
And right now I want to go live out to Brianna Harper, who is joining us. Brianna, what's happening behind you right now?
Well, Fred, we're continuing to monitor this scene right on the shopping center off of Beatties Ford Road. You can see officers back outline this food line that you see here behind me, kind of creating a barrier for folks to not be able to make it inside after the windows of the front entrance to the food line were smashed. And then we soon learned that the food line was not the only target. If you look here at this wireless store, you can see employees inside sweeping up broken glass. It looks like a shopping cart was thrown straight through the door, broken wide open. And now these folks, these business owners, are coming here late at night to clean up the aftermath of what it looks like people just trying to either damage property or break in and steal material and just cause chaos in this whole thing. We did see one gentleman, I'm not sure if he's the owner of a business, but he's just standing at the front door there, I guess, as a guard to protect against his own business and his own property, because this is kind of affecting everyone. So the police are doing what they can to make sure that no other businesses fall victim to this situation, Fred.
Yeah, we heard Councilman Tark Bakari talk about how this is insult to injury to business owners who had already suffered because of the economy as an effect of the coronavirus pandemic shutting businesses down. Now they have to deal with this. I'm listening in now. What are they talking about, Brianna? Did you hear that?
So what you're hearing is actually the security system for the food line. You'll hear like the siren go off and then it'll say system alarm, system alarm. So that's kind of been the continuing thing out here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of alerting folks that the alarm is going off. That's the situation that you're hearing.
Okay. All right. Well, a very active scene there off of Beatties Ford Road. We've seen our Brianna Harper report in front of a food line, and now the business behind her at that point looks like a Total Wine, where they were cleaning up debris from what looked like where someone had thrown a shopping cart, she reported, through that window. The business owners, the business operators there cleaning up even at this hour, halfway through midnight. Just an active protest that this has turned into since about 6:30 this evening. The Metro Division, the focal point of a protest, all stemming from what happened in Minneapolis with the black male who was killed there by a police officer, George Floyd. And we've seen protests like this all across the country, and now here in Charlotte, where we've seen several people arrested, some for property damage. We heard of Braxton Winston, a city councilor here in the Queen City, arrested for failing to comply with officers after they told him to disperse. And just a number of other property damage, from broken windows to the Metro Division to slashed tires on police cruisers. This has been quite the night for CMPD officers. Of course, they've got a lot of other things to deal with in the next coming days, at least protest, I should say. I'm pretty sure at this point they are calculating and recalibrating based on what's going on tonight, how they might tackle and monitor protests going on tomorrow. So this is an ongoing issue here in the Queen City. Once again, if you are just now joining us, this is a line of police officers, I should say, holding the line after vandalism had been taken at that food line there. No one was in that food line, according to our Brianna Harper and information she's getting on the ground, but some damage done to the windows there, and police have been there now for almost an hour since they responded to that scene. Of course, we'll have much more coverage throughout the weekend, as we've listed several protests going on. There you see them on your screen. We've got White Allies event in Marshall Park from noon to 2, and then on Sunday, Thug Life protest at Romare Bearden Park. Also a protest against police brutality from 1 to 8 p.m. at CMPD headquarters. Be sure to log on to our website, download the WCNC Charlotte mobile app for the latest information.